Hay as well, because where you have Heyman Lee, who is the victim in this case, but she also has these variables of discrimination in America where she is female and Asian. We don't, in America, policing want to care so much that she gets justice. What happens in policing that you see through the system evolving around Adnan, where you have the poor representation, you have the bail system, you have reliance on evidence that's all circumstantial, you have ineptitude in the detective work where they're covering up things and taking easier paths and not actually seeking justice. So we have these variables of discrimination in America that are expressed through this case where you have nobody actually pursuing justice for the victim, and then you have an easy narrative built around who we want to easily see as a suspect, as a them. And what this hopefully does for the world is now through Serial and through Undisclosed and through Truth and Justice, we've become to see Adnan as one of us because now we hear his stories, we hear his friends, and we understand that he's somebody that's just another one of our brothers, another one of our human beings on this planet. So now that we have that personified and we can empathize with Adnan's plight, then we can also need to twist that to show how the rest of the criminal justice system we need to also be fighting for, because we have these other victims now that we see that are easy to dismiss in the typical media narrative. You have Tamir Rice, and you have Rakia Boyd, and you have these names that end up becoming hashtags for justice because of this very same system that I hope we can see how it's discriminated against Adnan and translate to how that discriminates against a ton of minorities in this community.
So, we are, as usual, outside Dunkin' Donuts, and we're at the end of day 4 of the PCR hearing. And today was kind of a weird day. It was the most boring day by far, mostly because of the sheer amount of bench conferences going on. Because I think half the day wasn't witnesses. It was all the attorneys up at the bench arguing very, very enthusiastically about various things. After Fitzgerald had his cross and direct, the cross resumed for David Irwin, who was the expert attorney hired by the defense to talk about sort of attorney standard of care and like what is and is not okay for an attorney to do in terms of representing a client. He was the one who spoke about Asia McClain and whether or not Gutierrez had a duty of care to actually investigate the alibi witness that she was, and his answer was yes, absolutely yes. I think his quote was, as far as alibi witnesses go, she was a diamond. Maybe back then she was a diamond in the rough, but still a diamond. I mean, Thero's whole argument that, yeah, she's credible now, but wouldn't have been credible at 17, yeah, I'm not going to buy that one at all, because to the extent that is true, which it is a little bit true for sure, when she was 17, these memories were less than a year old. These memories are now much, much older. So she would have been much more credible, I think, just from the fact that she could credibly remember stuff. Whereas now, and she was very clear on this, there were times she had to guess. So Theroux it was a pretty good cross, I thought. Irwin fell a bit into the Fitzgerald trap, I felt, where he was getting a bit snippy. To be honest, you could kind of sense some animosity, which isn't good, because you want your expert witnesses to be very academic, very fact-based. Theroux definitely was effective in drawing out Irwin and getting him to make it a little more personal than generic, which I think was not a benefit to the defense's case. First line is him saying, "I can't imagine, I thought that this was what my retirement job would be." Because he's been waiting out in the hallway for I think 4 days now. And he finally got to go. But again, Irwin was very firm in his opinions, and he gave his, once he got away from sniping at Theroux, he's a very experienced attorney with a great record, and he knows his stuff, which came across loud and clear. So, and he just said over and over again, Theroux, you're trying to get me give an answer about strategy and whether or not Gutierrez had a strategy in not contacting Asia. But there's no strategy without information. Strategy is what you make and decide upon after obtaining information and evaluating it and figuring out the best course of action. And there's no evidence of any kind of strategy here. She just didn't do it. So Theroux ran through a long, long list of hypotheticals that were contradictory in nature. In the course of these 4 days, there have been a number of theories that the states try to present as to why Gutierrez never contacted Asia, or whether she did in fact actually contact her or something. He has a theory that Anon actually put up Asia as a false alibi witness and manufactured her letters. That's the basis of their theory, that Anon somehow contacted Asia and asked her to type up a letter establishing some kind of alibi, and it was based on details only learned later in March, which that one has no evidence for it. He was doing this thing earlier. It's like compare Asia's letters to the affidavits for the search warrants, and you can see where the source is. Those things have one fact in common, and that's that she was buried in Lincoln Park. And I'm pretty sure that was kind of the fact that was in every single report ever on this thing. So, anyway, that's where this whole story of Anon soliciting a false alibi came from. He also goes to the theory that Anon told his attorney a different alibi entirely. So we got two things there. First, we got Gutierrez didn't contact Asia because she knew it was a fake alibi witness that her client was giving her to investigate as obstruction of justice. And the other theory is that, Gutierrez didn't investigate Asia because her client was giving her a different alibi entirely that seemed more promising, so she never investigated Asia because her client didn't tell her it was important enough. There's also the theory that Rabia destroyed the files and took out references showing that references that show that Gutierrez did in fact talk to Asia, which, I can disprove that one, because in order to do what the state was suggesting Rabia might have done, which is take out any interview notes or any record of Gutierrez's contact with Asia, Rabia would have had to known the files a lot better than she did. But, that's not really evidence, just personal experience. So, the state might consider that, but there's no evidence of it other than Thiru's suggestions. And then there's the gossipy witness theory, the theory that if you have a witness that you know is a very gossipy person, you might strategically decide not to talk to them, because if you do, they might gossip about it, and that would hurt your case somehow. And they were more like that. There's all kinds of reasons, all kinds of hypotheticals as to why Gutierrez might not have talked to this alibi witness. So I'm sure there were more. That's all I can remember right now. Anyway, much to my surprise, it turns out Officer, aka Officer Steve, did testify. I was under the impression he would only be submitting an affidavit to the court, but they actually brought him in to testify today. And he was, I found him pretty credible in terms of he wasn't really bullshitting anyone. He's just okay, some people showed up last week at my work and wanted to talk to me and ask me about things that happened a very long time ago. And he kind of remembered stuff, but he was pretty clear, so also right now, keep in mind I'm talking before I've actually seen these two notes that were taken during his two interviews. In the notes, there is an invoice from Anon's defense investigator, which says everything he did, all the miles he drove, and all the hours he worked on it, basically to substantiate his claim for payment. And one of the entries from March, I forget the date, but it's early-ish March, says, talk to Wackenhut officer Steve. And Wackenhut was his employer, the agency that did all of this. And the prosecution found this in the defense file, which they were given. And I'm going to segue for a moment to note that if anyone saw Thiru's assertions yesterday in the news about how this claim of ineffectiveness is not consistent with what we're finding in the files, put up or shut up, because clearly there's nothing in those files worth showing if all you've given us is some very misleading and out of context stuff that I don't think anyone actually really buys your theory of once they see the whole doc. Back to topic at hand. Talking about how they found the file with the invoice from Drew Davis, and they see his name. So last week or 2 weeks, I don't even know, 31st, whenever that was, feels like a lifetime. They go talk to him, and it's Thiru, a detective, and they took some notes, which they were introduced into evidence but not put on the screen, so I have no idea what they said. And I'm still really kind of confused about what happened because it was not being explained in court. But what I do know is that both these times, the detectives were writing down notes of the conversation, and then at the very end, they had officer review them and sign his name at the very bottom. And apparently, here's what the notes said. Something like, Officer Steve says there were no cameras at the library in January of 99. Officer Steve is absolutely certain Anon Syed was not in the library on January 13th, 1999. It may have said more, but it didn't come out. It was the strangest direct examination I've ever seen. Like PCR trial anywhere. Theory's like, are you like, yeah, the notes the police took of your conversation say there were no libraries, says that there were no cameras in the library. Is that the case? He said, oh yeah, I don't remember any cameras, but it's possible there were cameras. And Theory's like, I don't know if he had a question or if he just moved on. So like when it's like, oh, it's possible there are cameras. I don't remember any, but they could have been there. This goes back to the Asia thing. Because on Asia's cross-examination, Theory kept saying, well, would it surprise you to learn there were no cameras in the library in January '99? So your story of calling someone to the library and having them tell you there were cameras is false? And this was his evidence that it was false. But no, it's not false. So that was the direct, and there's one line on direct that I thought was fascinating. And I think to me it says, Steve has no idea what case this was exactly. He just had people show up at his office and be like, remember something you did 17 years ago? And he's like, not really, kind of, sort of. Which, is an honest response for something like this. But there was a line where it said, at some point during this interview with the detectives, they showed you photos of kids. And at some point you saw a photo of the kid that was charged with the murder? Answer, yes. Question, did you recognize him? Answer, could not remember. Question, if you had recognized him, what would you have done? Answer, call 911. The best I got to explain that is that Officer Steve's under the impression that whatever happened back then, I think he thinks the reason everyone's all interested in this, or why anyone cares, is that a killer was in the library sometime in January '99, and they want to know if he saw the killer. And I'm not sure he's even aware the killer was a student there. This is just me guessing, but I think it's not that. I mean, Steve seems very credible. There's nothing about him that seems like he's like, even like attention seeking or like lying or just like he's being asked some really bizarre questions from a long time ago, and I don't think he was ever. I don't think anyone ever explained to him what exactly they wanted to know, and he's making a logical guess. If you're asking a security guard if you saw someone in the library, and it's a murder case, they probably want to know if you saw the killer. So. I don't know. That's just me guessing. That was a really strange day in court. Anyway, on cross, I thought Chris did a great job of hitting a point that was related but different. And he says, okay, so these notes that these cops took, it says there are no cameras in the library. Did you say that? He said, yeah. But you're saying now that there might have been, you just wouldn't know. He's like, yeah, but the cops didn't ask him that. So he didn't offer it, and so it's not in the notes. And so Chris is like, are you saying that police notes jotted down randomly in an interview might give misleading impressions about what was actually said? And I think Steve said, yeah, that'd be fair. Point being that those Juwan notes that were taken 17 years ago and are very patchy and barely there, and Theor was using them to say that Anon solicited a false alibi from Juwan. So anyone who didn't know that would have no idea what was going on with it. Well, no, wait, there's more to it too, because I want to know what was going on with that. How could I'm kind of speechless. The state thought it was a good idea to go find this witness, a security guard, and say, did you see this person in this photo at the library 17 years ago, on January 13th, 1999? And write down, he is absolutely certain that Anon Sayed was not in the library on January 13th, 1999. That's absurd. At one point, Chris asked Steve, that's a ridiculous question, isn't it? And Steve responded something like, well, I'm not going to answer that one. Implying that, yes, it was a ridiculous question. Did someone in the state actually think, here's a great idea. Let's go find a random security guard and have him identify the fact that 17 years ago, on a very specific day that has no other importance, this one person out of hundreds of kids was not there. What? Who even thought that was a good idea? No one thinks that's a good idea. Is there some really crafty strategy I'm not seeing? Is this thing over my head somehow and I'm just missing out? I don't know. I can't take it at face value because it makes no sense. But I don't see what else could be going on. That was Steve, and he, was just a normal guy giving a very normal statement under very confusing circumstances. Then we have, Justin says, we have a few pieces of evidence we want to get in. The first one being the Attorney Grievance Commission reports of Cristina Gutierrez. And state objects, court sustains. Well, they argue first, and the state's like, none of these are relevant. it's not relevant because it's more prejudicial. It just makes her look bad. It has no bearing on these proceedings, and Justin gives very good reasons why, namely the fact that the state just spent 4 days explaining in detail over and over again how amazing and competent she was. Prejudicial means it's more harmful than useful. Like it's so likely to inflame the decision maker, or like so likely to distract with like lurid details that it's too dangerous as evidence to use. And Justin's like, we would not be doing this if her family did not give us permission to do it. Like, and your theory is like they're trying to embarrass her memory. Like, no, her family says do this. I don't even remember, whatever many years ago when this first came up, he ruled it was not admissible. And there is, as far as I can see, no reason that was presented that would change his mind on that issue. That was his decision then, and it's his decision now, right or wrong, and he stood by it, which, you know, yeah, it is prejudicial. I mean, all evidence is to some extent. I mean, it's always prejudicial for one side, otherwise it's not evidence. What he did was let Justin enter it as, well, he let it identify it, but not admit it. So this way, it's in the record, and the appeals court can consider it if they deem it worthy of consideration. I think they absolutely should, because right now we have an absurd position where the state is allowed to argue that there are 1,001 reasons why Cristina Gutierrez could have strategically decided not to talk to Asia, or not to use her, or not to do anything about it. And Adnan's whole theory of the case is like, okay, backing way back up. The very start, Justin said, when we met with you a couple weeks ago, you said you had one question for us. Why? Why did Gutierrez not contact Asia? And Justin said, I'm trying to answer that, Judge. The why is that she was overwhelmed, ill, failing as an attorney, and incompetent. That is their theory of the case. That is their argument. The court wants a reason, and their reason is what we've all seen from the records, is that she, as an attorney, was falling apart. We heard it from many witnesses. We heard it from like at least 3 people who knew her and saw the decline, and we see it in the files. Right now, though, as it stands, the defense is left in a position where it cannot offer evidence to explain why Asia was not contacted if that evidence involves Gutierrez being ineffective. Which sucks, that's the whole point. He has to prove she was ineffective, but he's not allowed to offer evidence of why she was ineffective. So, like, basically, I mean, it's kind of where we're at now, is that the defense cannot offer its own evidence to support its theory. Instead, it must disprove every single prosecution theory of why Gutierrez didn't contact her for valid reasons. Which, I mean, that's a hard, like, how do you defeat 1,000 hypotheticals? There could be a million valid reasons. None of them really have evidence. Like, there's not evidence for it. Theory asking would it surprise you isn't evidence, but unless Justin can defeat all those hypotheticals, I mean, it's victory by absence of evidence. If they can rule out every explanation but one, then fine, they win. But they can't offer their own evidence to prove that explanation. And then Justin said, the defense rests. And the judge looks at Thiru, and he stands up and says, the state rests. And there's been a couple times in these hearings when I've been like trying to write as much down as I can, and I'll hear something, I'll start to write, I'm like, wait, what? I could not have heard what I just thought I heard. And this was one of those. I was like, wait, no. As I'm writing down the state rests, I'm like, wait, what? Nope, the state rests. That was it. Which, part of me, and this is like the conspiracy part of me, I'm not conspiracy, sorry. And this is like the paranoid attorney part of me, is like, oh shit, that was a brilliant strategic choice. Because, I mean, let's just say there was some evidence I was really looking forward to having come in. And I don't think it can come in now. I mean, not all of it, some can. But, like, I have no, like, on rebuttal, there's nothing to rebut other than a few things. So, I mean, if Thiru was, like, trying to prevent us from getting certain stuff in, well, he succeeded, so. This one goes to you, sir. But, I don't know if that's the reason. I don't know what else to make of it. Because that's it. They have one witness, and that was Chad Fitzgerald, and they rested. Luckily, it was the very end of the day, and there was not enough time to give closing arguments. Because the defense does have rebuttal witnesses. They're just not here today because Justin didn't expect for them to be needed today. I guess, I don't know if he thought the state was putting on evidence or what. But now we'll be back here tomorrow. We are apparently expecting snow tomorrow, which I only learned very end of the day. And I don't think it's too much, but I don't think it's too much to shut everything down around here. So, snow, stay away. We got enough like last
Okay,
week.
so I need to
So
find
we're not
I need to
ending this
find
until this time
attack
tomorrow
speed.
for the defense to put on a
I need to
rebuttal.
find attack
And then
speed
close it out, and then we're
potions.
done.
Speed potions,
Hi, this is
flight,
Colin Miller down in South Carolina.
King's
I'm reporting at
Crown,
about 4:30
Butcher
p.m.
Cleaver,
on day 4 of the reopened PCR proceedings
Vorpal
in the
Blade
Adnan
thing,
Syed case. Today we had 3 witnesses.
some
2 of
defense
them were
stuff. I
continuations
found
from Friday.
Stigmata.
The
That
first
should
of
be
them
good.
was FBI Special Agent Chad
That'll help me from
Fitzgerald.
dying.
At the end of the
Because
proceedings
if I
on
get all the
Friday,
items that I want to get,
Adnan's attorney Justin
I
Brown
have more than enough
showed
damage. It's just
Agent
I
Fitzgerald
just need to not
a
die.
document which indicated there were successive pings from Adnan's cell phone in DuPont Circle in DC and then in Baltimore, Maryland. And the claim was it was physically impossible for a person to travel between those 2 locations in the time elapsed. After looking at those documents, Fitzgerald asked the judge for a recess. He granted it, and this morning we had the continuation. According to Justin Fenton in a tweet, but now agent says doc handed to him was manipulated, and defense counters that means Syed's original defense had bad records. Seems like a great argument by the defense, because the claim is what we showed Fitzgerald is the same thing the state turned over to the defense back in 1999. And the Brady claim by the defense is the documents
Oh
were
man, I really want that blood
they were cobbled
shockwave. That
together
shit's
from
so
various
OP.
documents. They were confusing, and they failed to key both the expert at trial and Christina Gutierrez that there were real problems with the pings in this case. And the key precedent here is Ware versus State.
Oh, I also
Court of
want
Appeals
I,
of
want, I
Maryland
also want
case
skeleton key.
says if the failure
That'll
to
be
make
really
any
important to have.
response is rarely
100 keys.
excusable,
Even
and
though
simply a
later
misleading
on in
response
the
is
game,
seldom, if ever, excusable as well.
although
and
later
that's
on
what
in the game
Brady
it's not that
doctrine.
important.
So basically, according
Okay,
to Fitzgerald
I need to look
himself,
up what
this is a
that relic is.
confusing, misleading document, and if he's correct, that supports the defense's claim of a Brady violation. Moving to the next witness, also a continuation. This
I'm
was
trying to
David
only
Irwin.
pick
He is a
relics.
criminal defense attorney
At the
in
very
Maryland,
beginning,
a
I'm
former
going to be very
prosecutor.
selective
He's
about
the
which
one who
relics
said
I
on
pick up.
Friday that Christina Gutierrez fell well below the standard for effective assistance by failing to contact
So I want
Agent
butcher's
McLean.
knife.
Basically, as far as I can tell, the Deputy Attorney General during cross-examination today asked a series of hypotheticals such as, would you have
Maybe
to contact a
rockets.
prospective alibi witness if they had 5 prior convictions? Would you have to contact them if they were on a space station? And for me, really, the question here is simple.
Maybe some critical chance.
Is there any legitimate, reasonable scenario under which the defense did not have to contact Agent
Oh, I think this is
McLean?
good.
And legal
Oh yeah,
precedent
this is
seems to indicate the
that's the
answer is
item that
no.
has a chance
Key
to
case
hit
here
kill
is the
monsters in
Griffin
one hit.
case. It's out of the 4th Circuit. It's actually a case that originated from the Baltimore City Circuit Court, the same court that heard Adnan's trial, and is now hearing his PCR appeal. And in the Griffin case, Donald Griffin was charged with robbery and using a handgun during a crime of violence at a Rite Aid. And basically, in the case, he claimed that defense counsel was ineffective based upon failing to contact an alibi witness, Rodney Staples. The legal precedent the court cited was Grooms versus Solem. It's an 8th Circuit case that's been cited by a lot of courts across the country. That stands for the proposition that once a defendant tells an attorney about a prospective alibi witness, quote, it is unreasonable not to make some effort to contact alibi witnesses to ascertain whether their testimony would aid the defense. Now, in that case, the state's claim was, well, there was a legitimate reason not to contact this alibi witness. And what was that? One of the security guards at the Rite Aid actually
want
picked
flight.
the alibi witness's picture out of a photo array as one of the perpetrators of the crime. And so basically the state's claim was there was a legitimate reason not to contact this alibi witness because he could have been implicated in the crime. 4th Circuit very quickly put aside this argument. They said, quote, this reasoning is thoroughly disingenuous. David did not even talk to Staples, let alone make some strategic decision not to call him. And then reading a bit down in the opinion, quote, the illogic of this approach is pellucidly depicted by this case, where the attorney's incompetent performance deprived him of the opportunity to even make a tactical decision about putting Staples on the stand. The exact same thing being argued in this case. Whatever doubts Gutierrez might have had about Asia McClain, however well-founded or ill-founded, the only way she could
Which
reasonably
one's that
decide
one?
not to call her as an alibi witness at trial
10%
was by first
chance the poison
contacting
targets. I
her,
don't care about
having
poison.
someone on her team suss out exactly how reliable or unreliable she was. It seems to me from tweets that the other strategy by the Deputy Attorney General is to try to claim it was reasonable not to contact Asia McClain because she would have contradicted Adnan's usual routine of school track mosque. Sounds a bit to me like the Jersey Shore gym tan laundry. Problem for the state is actually that's not his routine, or at least it's not the routine as described in the notes by Cristina Gutierrez. So I'm reading here directly from the notes of Gutierrez when Asia came up, and the notes say Asia and boyfriend saw him in library 2:15.
I should only
to
pick up
3:15,
yellow,
and then
yellow,
underlined
orange.
it says went to library often.
I don't want that.
So
I don't want
Gutierrez's own
this
notes
fucking
indicate
fedora.
that Adnan told her
Fuck off,
he went to
fedora.
the library often. And beyond that, we have the affidavit from Krista. We have the testimony from Asia. Both said the Woodlawn Public Library was considered part of this school, so it wouldn't even be contradictory. But beyond that, yeah, we have from the notes directly when Asia McClain is discussed, Adnan saying he went to the library often. So I'm not sure where the state is getting the claim that this was not part of his typical routine. Okay, the final witness called today, at least as of 4:30, was Steve, the security guard at the library, and basically, very briefly, he testified on direct. He didn't think the library had security cameras back in 1999, and then on cross-examination, apparently he said he's not sure whether, in fact, the library had security cameras
Ooh,
back in
that's good.
1999.
Chance to stun
This
on an
relates
attack.
to Asia McClain's claim in her letter, March 1st, 1999, that she called the library and in fact determined that they had security cameras, which could have been used potentially to establish their interaction at the library. So, yeah, basically this witness wasn't very helpful. He waffled, and what we know is the librarian has already been called by the defense. It's the same librarian who talked to Sarah Koenig in the first episode of Serial, and what she said was back in 1999, the library did have security cameras, and in fact, she was the one who took out the tape for the security camera each day and put in the new one. So overall, it seems like a pretty positive day for the defense. We'll see if there's any more testimony today. We'll see how things shape up, but as of today, it seems pretty strong arguments on both the Asia claim and the cell tower claim. The state still has most of its witnesses to come. We'll see what comes with day 5.
Hi, my name is Amber Khan. I've been following the podcast from Serial to Undisclosed to Truth and Justice. I'm from Baltimore City. I've been following the case because I was a part of the community and I heard about it growing up, and I didn't actually know the facts until I started listening to the podcast and learning more about the case. And so I'm basically here because I'm completely convinced of Adnan's innocence based off of everything that's been presented and off of everything that it seems that the state has done that's schemy and everything like that. So I have been following it from the beginning, and it only made sense to come through to the trial, to the hearing, and see what is actually going on and see everything to the end because it's important. So some of the things I think that about today is that I think that bringing in the officer was actually more harmful for the case for the state versus actually helpful, because it only proved that the state was only trying to further agenda in the schemy way that they do by having them say some things and signing off on it and getting people confused in certain situations and allowing them to continue. So I think that overall the Adnan's defense team did a great job. I took off work on Friday and I took off work this morning. If it continues, I'm going to continue to have to take off of school and work. I took little breaks to go to school, but I was here in the beginning and end for the most part.
And it was cool today. I got to talk to a lot more fans than I have. And I have been basically rushing for 15 minutes a day, and then in the courtroom for hours. Get out, 15 minutes, rush around, record 4 things, back in the court and sit for hours. So I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to too many people, but today I've had more more listeners come up, which is great. Get to chat with them briefly, as again I'm usually wolfing down donuts or something. So that's been good. We've even got to talk to a few on the podcast, and yeah, if you see us about, come say hi. I love to talk to y'all. Although I may rush off suddenly when something happens, but I'd love to say hi to you guys.
Wait, is the PCR over?
No, it's not over.
Shit! What do you mean? I thought it's over. They both rested.
They vested their cases. They're still rebuttal and closing. So I guess we'll do the case portion.
So I am still
Yeah, you're still sequestered.
sequestered. Well,
Your
fudge.
sequestering will never end.
Bye. Hi guys, this is Rabia, and I am here at Adnan's day 4 of the hearing. We're doing our undisclosed live updates, or daily updates of what happens in the appeal hearing. And today has been, I've heard, an interesting, very lively day with an officer who was presented as a state's witness, who ended up doing really great things for the defense. And then I think in the morning they had more of our expert criminal defense attorney witness, Erwin, who, as everybody knows, is fantastic anyways. So both sides have rested, and I didn't know exactly what that meant. I thought that meant the case is over, they give closings, I'm not sequestered, hallelujah, but yeah, I'm still sequestered, damn it.
You've been listening to Undisclosed Live, and with any luck, we'll see you tomorrow for the very last day of the non-PCR hearing.
Got it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we got it. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Hi, we're fans of Undisclosed, and you're listening to Undisclosed Live.
Hi, this is Susan Simpson with Undisclosed Live at the 5th and certainly final day of Adnan's PCR hearing. I'm at the Duncan. It is 9:29. Technically court's at 9:30, but we haven't started on time yet this week, so I think I got some wiggle room here. It is snowing. It's really pretty, but the court's still open, so that works out fine. Yeah, most likely I think we'll just hear closing arguments today. I'm very curious to see what both sides come out with. Things have gone very well. I think the team did an amazing job, and their job here was to put on the best case they could. That's all they could control, and they did that. And I called Doug Colbert last night. He left the court, I think, before the last witness, and he wanted me to give him an update. Doug Colbert was Adnan's attorney for the bail hearing back in '99, along with Chris Floor. So I called him, and we were talking about what happened, and I was saying, I think I feel optimistic, and I hate that. I never, as a litigator, I'm never optimistic, and as a rule, I will not be. And I was saying I don't want to be optimistic, but I kind of can't help it. And he said, be hopeful, not optimistic. And that made a lot of sense to me, because I am feeling hopeful right now. And you never know what's going to happen. Things can always happen in court you don't expect. But I feel hopeful. And let's go see what they have for closings.
Hi, this is Rabia. Welcome to day 5 of Adnan's reopened PCR hearing. We are doing undisclosed live updates of the hearing. And today, there's some big news, right? Only big news because I was unsequestered for the closing arguments, which was nice. It was really great to finally be in there and to hear Justin and to hear Thuru and see Adnan. And he saw me a number of times, smiled, waved. So I think he's also kind of relieved that I got a chance to at least be in there, show my support. So I'm going to give a brief kind of overview of what went down. It is lunchtime right now, but we are not done yet. Justin gave about a little over an hour-long closing remarks. And Justin gave I thought it was a really tight closing argument. He kind of went over the issues again. He made the point clear over and over that much of what the prosecution was offering was speculation without any evidence to back it up. For example, he mentioned over and over how there were no witnesses presented to make the prosecution's case. For example, if the prosecution's making a case that Gutierrez met her duty by not, even though she failed to call Asia as an alibi witness, he didn't present a single evidence to testify that. He didn't present any...
You mean questions from the prosecutor isn't evidence?
Oh, no, well, I think the prosecutor's stories are cute and everything, and, his hypotheses and theories are great. I mean, I feel like I've heard it all kind of, though. Don't they sound really familiar, Susan?
They've got some new ones. They definitely have some new ones. Give them credit.
What new ones? I've seen them all on Reddit. I saw them months ago. What new ones?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, new for them. I mean...
I don't know.
We'll get into it. There really were points where everyone's like, oh, I bet he's going to steal his arguments from Reddit. I'm like, that's stupid. Of course he's not going to. And there were points today I was like, wait, did he actually steal this from Reddit?
Yeah.
Only he didn't, because Reddit gets more right than he does.
Anyhow, I'm going to let Susan talk more about the closing that Justin gave. Thuru was still going on with his closing.
Probably add that.
And
the reason we're at lunch during closing arguments is because yours has gone on that long.
Yeah, he put up some foam boards, really pretty stuff. He had some slides. The thing that was interesting is that it took a long time for him to actually get to the issues that are being litigated. He started with a real long summary of this was the evidence in the case, and almost like he wants to kind of just remind. Well, I mean, he was. I understand why he was doing it. He was talking about the second prong of Strickland, which is that you have to show that.
That's what he said he was doing.
I mean, I kind of get it. And the only reason he can do that is because he can't show the first one. I think it's clear that Gutierrez failed her duty. So now you have to prove that by failing her duty, there was some impact, some prejudice to Adnan. So what he's trying to do...
I think he's telling the judge, look, if you're going to do what you might do here, you're letting a cold-hearted murderer of a young girl go free. And he's like reminding him as often as possible, Your Honor, you do this, you're letting this murderer go free.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to be.
Yeah, it is just a recital of, it's almost like the closing from the first trial in a way. It's interesting. Anyhow, okay, I'll let Susan take over so she can get to the meat and potatoes on her 85 pages of notes.
Yeah. My hand actually is starting to hurt today. So I'm trying to get as much of it down, word for word as possible, so I can quote their lovely phrases. And, so far I'm keeping up. Justin's closing was really good. It was sound. I loved those. It was just well organized. It was folksy and friendly but intelligent. It hit all the points it should have hit. Very well done. I've got some quotes in here that I love that I'll find eventually. That's an easy answer. It was amazing and fantastic, but it really was. I don't. And I'm not just saying that because obviously I support Adnan's case and I support this side of the hearing, but it was good. Oh, I guess we did forget one thing from this morning. So what ultimately happened is Abe Warnowitz didn't testify. The judge kind of wanted to be done with this, and he said he preferred to have an affidavit entered instead. So Abe made an update affidavit clarifying what Fitzgerald was trying to confuse about, no, this is what I actually said and meant. I like the way when Justin put it. He's like, read the first affidavit. It's all there. It says, I would not have testified the way I did had I seen the affidavit. And Justin said, that's engineer talk for he's recanting. And it is. That's recanting in the sense that he would not have done what he did had he seen that sheet. So on to the closings. Justin points out that he pointed out how he said there were only 2 witnesses for the prosecution, and actually only 1 witness because Officer Steve was really our witness. He helped us, not them. So all they've got is 1 witness, and that's Chad Fitzgerald. And the way he said it, he didn't need really to go into the evasiveness and the refusal to answer. I kind of said it all. Their only witness is Chad Fitzgerald. So we get to closing. I wasn't kidding earlier. I don't think that Theroux knows this case. We're so far into it, and he still doesn't know basic facts. Apparently, did you know that Becky Walker testified in the first trial that she saw Hay at the school at 3 p.m. and would have testified to that in the second trial, but didn't come out? No, that was Debbie. So he can't even keep his witnesses straight. But ignoring the name switch, Theroux brings this up as evidence that Gutierrez was considering an alternative strategy that relied on a 3 p.m. departure from school for Hay, and therefore the decision to ignore Asia was valid. Well, if that was a strategy, he just admitted that she failed to do it. So her entire strategy failed because she couldn't get a witness to make the same statement they made in a previous trial. And this is litigating 101. It's not hard to do that. You get a witness that changes their story at a second trial, you pull up the transcript and you go, oh really? Isn't it true last time I asked you this, you said XYZ? And you get that 3 p.m. thing in. There's no question she could have gotten that in, but didn't, because she was ineffective. And Theroux's up there going, look, it's proof of how diligent she was. She had a different strategy. Well, if that was her strategy, and it wasn't, it doesn't matter, because she totally failed to do it. So, it's all... It might be unfair to say he's all over the place. People are shaking their heads. Okay, so...
Are you talking about Theroux?
Yeah.
He's telling a rambling story, but I was get to the issues. I
He's
just kept waiting
starting-
for... I think because he doesn't have a lot to say on the issues. That's
He's
the thing.
told us all the ways in which, well, not all of them correct, but all the ways in which Anon has killed Hay. Anon killed Hay. Anon killed Hay. Anon killed Hay. That's all he's doing up there, or was doing. He's finally, just before lunch, started to get more into the actual issues at the PCR hearing. Not a trial here. You don't need to argue. You don't give a closing about how guilty the guy is at a PCR hearing. My favorite thing is he made this lovely little chart of all the letters Gutierrez was sending to the prosecutors trying to obtain evidence. And look how diligent she was. That's proof of how much discovery dodging jerks the prosecutors were being. Because yes, she did write lots and lots of letters trying to get evidence because the prosecutors weren't giving him any. And he says, oh, they had an open file policy and she could have gotten anything she wanted. If the prosecutor's office had an open file policy like they're claiming, then she could have just gone there once, copied stuff out of the file, and not written 24 letters being like, Yurik, give me the documents you should have given me months ago. Yurik, give me the documents, over and over again. So that's his grand proof that Gutierrez was diligent. It's further proof that his claims about the open file policy are bogus because, again, you can't, one sentence in your closing be all, oh, it's open file policy, so any of this Brady speculation is meritless because she could have gotten it and got our files. And then the next sentence say, look how diligent Gutierrez was because she wrote all these letters demanding that the prosecutors give her evidence. Which is it? Was she diligent or were the prosecutors hiding evidence? And I feel like I have a unique perspective in this closing because I know all these documents by heart. So I know before he brings them up what he's talking about. And he is misrepresenting the hell out of them. And no one's ever going to be able to call him on it because you'd have to look at, in a closing you can't do it because we're not even having a closing argument, are we?
This is not a closing argument. He's completely inaccurate in some places, and it is just literally I don't. That's what I keep wondering. Is I don't know if Justin could do a rebuttal, but then how long do you keep going back in circles over and over again?
Justin will do a very tight rebuttal, hit some of the bigger absurdities, and walk away. But so with Theroux, I now know why the state arrested yesterday and called no more witnesses, because Theroux is their witness. His little binder trick where he got 2 binders admitted into evidence, one containing the MPIA, one containing the defense file, without getting individual documents admitted, means he can now on closing pull out random docs we've never seen before, ever in the course of this hearing, and be like, here's more proof of what I'm saying. So the two binders of evidence, binders A and B. A is the defense file. Well, A is selected portions of the defense file. B is selected portions of the state's file, but mostly just the MPIA, which Gutierrez didn't even have. So, and at first, he would try to get them both admitted. Justin objected. The court kind of delayed. I think by day 2, he was like, I can all come in. So everything's now on the record. And that's why in closing, you can see the prosecutor randomly pulling up new documents and making arguments about them. That's not a closing thing. In closing, you discuss the evidence what was already done. You don't bring up new ass files that no one's ever heard of and be like, I'm going to explain to you now why this shows that she wasn't ineffective. So it's new evidence in that respect. And Justin said it in his closing, why didn't they put one attorney on the stand who would be willing to say that what Gutierrez did is fine, or that her files don't show an attorney who is falling apart at the seams? Well, the answer is they did find one attorney willing to say that, Thiru. Apparently the only attorney in Baltimore who was willing to make such a crazy claim. We are outside the courthouse and the end of the PCR hearing. As predicted, the court did not issue a ruling. It will issue a written opinion, likely in a couple months. So now we wait. Wow. That was a longer day for just having closings to go through than I expected. But Thiru's closing did eventually end. Eventually. I don't even know how long it went on for. After we recap the entire body of evidence in this case, well, the entire body of evidence that helps the prosecution, Justin, in his rebuttal, wrote down the exact same thing I wrote down of what Thiru was saying, and that was after he goes on this long tirade about all this evidence that could somehow maybe possibly show, oh, look, he's holding a press conference over there. Sorry, I just noticed that Thiru was sitting there with all the press around him. After Thiru goes through his whole long spiel about, oh, maybe, possibly, Adnan was soliciting an alibi from Asia with a complicated conspiracy with Jawan, Justin, and all these people. He's like, I don't know. It's just a theory. And Justin said in his opening, he quoted the case law. It says, you cannot defeat a claim like you have to have evidence showing strategy. Speculation by a prosecutor is not evidence and is not sufficient to show that an attorney made a reasonable choice in not taking a particular strategy. And then Thiru's like, I'm going to speculate on a bunch of stuff here. I mean, I know that my opponent just quoted the case law saying speculation isn't evidence, but that's all I got, so I guess I'm going to roll with it. And Justin, just on his rebuttal, took him to the cleaners on that. Rightfully so, because as much as Thiru's up there pointing out all these documents and rummaging through the defense files and suggesting that there were things that could be linked together to show some grand, really convoluted and kind of nonsensical theory of a conspiracy. And then Justin's like, okay, great. Then you should have gotten a witness up here to say that. The fact you couldn't get a witness to say it means it's not in the record. Because apparently Thiru is the only attorney in all of Baltimore willing to go on the record with this theory of why Gutierrez was competent. So here's Thiru's idea. Thiru's idea is that Adnan intentionally used Jay to be his alibi witness for the murder. His other idea is that Adnan did not know on March 9th that Jay was a state's witness and thought they were still on Adnan's side. These two ideas cannot be reconciled because if Adnan's sitting there planning to use Jay as his alibi witness and then gets arrested and has no idea that Jay is turned against him, then why did he never mention Jay as his alibi? You don't spend all this time crafting an alibi and then not use it when you're arrested? No. I don't know what I just witnessed because
580.
it's like someone printed off a bunch of random Reddit posts and read them out of order. Maybe started reading random comments too. Because he didn't know the facts. He got simple things wrong over and over again about who said what or what dates things happened on. I guess not huge in the scheme of things. The fact you don't even know which witness said what is kind of a big deal when you're the prosecutor in a major PCR hearing, and when you're conveying these facts to the judge. And also, as Justin called him out at the very end, which was kind of fantastic. He didn't just call out Thiru. He called out Kevin Urich. Justin got up there in rebuttal and said, he says I have a few points to make, and he goes through them. And I think it's like the third or fourth one. He says, Mr. Urich. Talks about how Urich has a long history with this case and is relevant to it. He said, like, I don't know if it was in this courtroom last time around. And the judge cuts in and is like, actually, it was 2 courts down. And then Justin says, Urich got on the stand and said all this about Asia being pressured into writing an affidavit. And he said at this hearing today, this week, a large body of evidence has been presented that indicates what Kevin Urich said is not true. And that should scare every person in this courtroom. The state's being pretty brazen, because if you're going to stand by that, what Kevin Urich said, then you bring Kevin Urich in here and put him on the stand. Boom. Like, enough said. Like I was saying, I don't even know, someday, at some point, they're all blowing together. What Asia said makes Kevin Urich a liar. And if you have a witness on the stand saying that a prosecutor for Baltimore lied about what she told him on the stand in a PCR hearing, then if you believe that no wrongdoing was done here, and if you stand by your prosecutor, you put him on the goddamn stand. I'm sorry. The fact that they didn't call him shows that they're terrified of what Asia McClain said. And they do not stand by their case, because put Kevin Urich up, because you know what? I know why they didn't put Kevin Urich up, because we would have destroyed him. Like, oh, things we didn't get to use now because Kevin Urich didn't testify. Guess what? Asia's not the only witness that he tried to prevent from talking about the case. He did a similar thing with Abe Warnowitz, because I was talking to Abe and asking him for questions about the case and the cell phone evidence. And when Urich found out, he wrote a very tersely worded letter to Abe saying, you shouldn't be talking to anyone about it because it's just going to cause a lot of stress for you if you do so, so you shouldn't be doing that. And it worked. Abe got scared off for a while. So with Asia is not the first time, or at least not the only time, where he's done this kind of thing. There's a lot of reasons they did not put Urich on the stand. But still, if they believed in their case, they would have. They had this other idea too, that, oh, maybe Asia was a genuine alibi. Maybe she was being honest. After we just spent an hour describing why she's a lying liar who lies, maybe she was honest. Maybe everything she said was true. But that doesn't matter, because maybe that's just part of the murder. Maybe Anand got hay outside the library at 3 o'clock, and that's why you couldn't use the library alibi, because it was actually part of the murder plan. Well, you know what? Doesn't matter, because the state committed to its stupid 230 murder theory, and Asia destroys that. So this speculation about when a different murder might have occurred that totally contradicts the state's case has no bearing in what the court is considering now.
Hi, we're back, and it is the end of the day. We are in Justin Brown's offices, and I'm going to pick up telling you guys what happened after lunch, which is the last time I checked in. We headed back to the courthouse, and actually closing arguments had resumed. The prosecutor, Thiru Vigna Raja, had begun, he was resuming his closing arguments, which were quite long. I think he must have gone on for more than 2.5 hours. What was interesting to me was that much of it was spin and just argument, but he wasn't really addressing the issues head on, and the issues very specific. So he would even take, for example, the facts. I mean, with Asia, he kept trying to draw attention to, instead of addressing the issue of whether or not it was okay for Christina not to contact her. He started talking about, oh, this is all the evidence, and I'm not gonna lie. Honestly, I feel like every single thing we've seen on Reddit for the last year, from the people who feel Adnan is guilty, literally this is a recital of their arguments. So the ridiculous things the breakup note from the previous November, and getting a cell phone from 2 days before. And he just was making a case. He was making a case like he was at trial or something. And it was get to the issues in front of you, which are facts cover sheet, and how that would have impacted the testimony of the expert, and Asia not being contacted, but he just would dance around it a lot. So I guess the argument he was trying to make was that Asia Even if Asia had appeared, it wouldn't have mattered because there was such overwhelming evidence. Now, what was great was that Justin was fantastic. I mean, so his closing just went on and on. And I mean, we were really getting exhausted. And the judge finally said, "You need to wrap it up." And then we had a break. Justin Brown came back, and he also misrepresented some things. I mean, like for example, he misrepresented. He came up with this crazy theory, which Justin very justifiably called it a conspiracy theory, and he's right. It's total conspiracy. He came up with this theory that maybe Gutierrez didn't contact Asia because she knew that that would actually help the state's case, because she thought that Hay had last been seen at 3 p.m. What was hilarious was that he kept referencing the testimony of Debbie. He's saying, these witnesses testified that she was seen around 3, but they testified later. I mean, like, we're talking about, mistakes she made way before trial, right? So how could she look in the future and say, this is what the witnesses are going to do? But so he had this really odd theory that this might have been part of it. And he said, part of that theory was, he said that, Christina knew that going to the library was not part of Adnan's general routine. And so she didn't want to touch it, because then she would have to explain why all of a sudden, on the day this girl, disappeared, he fell out of routine. So he pulls up a document in which I think there were some handwritten notes, and I think Adnan had told either paralegal or Tina that, school, track practice, mosque, right? And it was so disingenuous, because when Justin did his rebuttal, and I'm so glad Justin did it, he went bam, and he took the same document, pulled it up a little bit, and on the same document it said, often goes to library. I mean, Justin not only pointed out how disingenuous, and really he's making total misrepresentations to the court, right? Like, he's trying to pull the wool over this judge's eyes, and everybody's sitting there by just not sliding the document up further. So, but what was great about it was Justin didn't just point that out. He said we should be scared of prosecutors doing things like this. And he's right, we should. Because we are dealing with systematic issues in the system, that they have so much power they can do this. Justin said very clearly, and I thought this was fantastic, he looked right at him and he said, I resent you for, not you, but I resent the insinuations, because he kept implying that Justin somehow had manipulated, like, the cell phone evidence. And God, Justin's like one of the most ethical people I've ever met. And so Justin was like, I resent it. He repeated it a couple times, and I thought that was really strong. And I mean, he just was like, all of this stuff that the prosecutor's saying, he's like, this is the prosecutor. It's his argument. This is not evidence. There's a difference between evidence and argument, right? Like, so, for example, if he's going to offer the theory that this is maybe what Adnan did this, maybe he did this, put somebody on the witness stand who's going to testify to that. If you're going to say what Tina did was okay, put somebody in the stand and testify to that. Where's your evidence? Your evidence has to be documents. It has to be testimony, right? It can't just be this is what the prosecutor thinks. And really, the only person who actually kind of testified from the state was the prosecutor himself, But it's not even considered evidence because it's not testimony. It's just rhetoric. So he BS'd himself, through 4 or 5 days. He just BS'd, all through it. That's what I think I don't think the state has much going on. I don't think they have a leg to stand on. Justin gave a very tight, short rebuttal. It was brutal. It was like, let's pare this down. These are the issues. This is what happened. It's simple. It's not as complicated as this guy's making it. When the judge wrapped up, I almost thought he was going to make render a decision, because he kind of leaned forward and said thank you. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to make a decision. But then he said, I'm going to give a written decision. We actually think it'll probably be in the next few weeks, I think month or so, which is pretty quick for a post-conviction, but the judge is retired, and it's the only case he's handling. And he knows there's a lot of people waiting on this decision, so we hope for a good result.
That was a joke. No. Oh God. No. I'll tell you. No. This is. Feel the. Oh God. This was this. Let me talk about that a little bit, because this was the first time Chris and I have worked on the same case before, representing co-defendants, but this is the first time that we have essentially tried a case side by side together. I thought Chris was phenomenal. His cross of the security guard, if I had done that, it would have been a disaster, because my style is very different from his. I was very proud of him. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So can you just tell me a little bit about how you're feeling right now?
I'm tired. It's been a long 5 days. We have worked. We've been working about 15 hours a day. I think I took a little bit of time off on Saturday, and I watch a little bit of the Super Bowl, but I haven't been sleeping. We have been preparing for every possible scenario of what could have happened at the hearing. So the stuff that you saw in the hearing is literally the tip of the iceberg. I think about, a couple days into it, we started, probably actually on the first day, we started to figure out what their strategy was going to be. And once we figured that out, we started to try to move in front of them and kind of be a step ahead of them. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. So there wasn't a time when we were surprised by anything. And I think, that's a big part of being successful in this type of setting, is that you've just got to be one step ahead of your opponent. Right. The state strategy was to try to take the defense file, which they had and which we couldn't keep away from them, and to try to use that against us and to build possible reasons why Gutierrez would not have contacted Asia. And the best way for them to do it, and this is what I said in my closing arguments, is if they had really solid theories that would have alleviated Gutierrez of her duty to investigate, then what they should have done is put an expert witness on to endorse those theories. But without any live testimony supporting what they were saying, everything was empty. And I think that they couldn't find someone who's going to say that. I don't think they could find a criminal defense attorney in good standing and of good repute who would say that a criminal defense attorney does not have the duty to go out and interview an alibi witness. That's what I think. I think there is some truth to that argument, that it's our burden, right? So we presented our case first, and we have to prove our points. It's up to us. If we do nothing, then we lose. If the state does nothing, they might lose and they might win. So in a technical sense, that is correct, that he doesn't have any burden and he doesn't have to put on any witnesses if he doesn't want to. Now, that said, if you want to win a very hotly contested proceeding like this, it can often be advantageous to put on witnesses. So, they did put on a couple witnesses, and it's their strategy. It is what it is. I believe that there are certain standards that attorneys have to maintain in their practice. And the standards, in my opinion, and this is Justin Brown speaking, but the standards, particularly for a prosecutor, are probably higher than they are for example, criminal defense attorneys. And they have an obligation as prosecutors and as representatives of the state to do things in a manner that is fair and in a manner that presents the truth with some accuracy. And I have a problem when prosecutors present information in a manner that they know to be inaccurate, and that if it is done with the intention of deceiving the court, then I have a problem with that. Now, that said, it's very possible that those were innocent mistakes, and he had not seen the documents that fully fleshed out whatever fact he was trying to establish. But to me, stuff like that's important. And when I see something that makes me think those rules are not being abided by, it concerns me. And as I said in court, it scares me. Twitter, I don't know a whole lot about it. I was accused of tweeting about the security guard, Steve, falsely. I never tweeted anything about it, but I think the other side understands Twitter less than I do, which is somewhat remarkable. And I was falsely accused of tweeting about him, which I never did. But I think it's fascinating. And, Periscope and all this stuff, it's like, it just, as a former journalist, I truly appreciate the significance of it and how it changes the way that things are covered. This is a very challenging hearing to cover because cameras are not allowed in the courtroom. And I just spoke with someone a minute ago who just said, well, I wasn't there, but I followed the hearing. I'm like, how in the world did you follow the hearing? Were people violating the judge's orders and tweeting from the courtroom or recording things? He's like, no. They run outside, people tweet something, and then there's a feed you can watch on Reddit. Yeah. So maybe when I go home tonight, I'll check it out. But it's fun, and I think it's great, and I have tried to embrace it, and try to get out in front of it rather than, be the guy falsely accusing other lawyers of doing things that they didn't do.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I drove here from New Jersey because I was a really big fan of Serial, and then I started listening to Undisclosed and consequently Truth and Justice. So I'm pretty well versed in the whole case. So I just happened to have Monday off. I didn't catch the first couple days, so I drove here. on
Dragon
Sunday night,
Shield.
and I got a
Every
job.
8
I've been
attack
here for
launches
about
huge
2
meteor
days,
to the
and
nearest
it was
enemy.
really, really interesting to watch.
Mm.
I really wanted to see Justin in action because just hearing about it was
Yes.
satisfying in the tweets, and I thought he did a really good job. The prosecutor, he's good too, but it's just like Justin just said in his last comments, it's all hypotheticals, and the difference in quality of the witnesses was really apparent. I think Asia, and I didn't see her, but I heard about her. And Erwin, who I saw, was just they were so solid, and then I don't even know why they put Steve on, to be quite honest. Like Justin said, all he did was help them. But yes, I kind of feel like the judge is gonna, I think it's gonna go in our favor, or I say our, I'm a part of it, but yeah, I feel like it is gonna go in Adnan's favor.
Hi, this is Colin Miller down in South Carolina, reporting on the 5th day of the reopened PCR proceedings in the Adnan Syed case. I think it's even tougher today to go through tweets and try to figure out what happened during closing arguments than it was to figure out what happened during testimony. That said, I wanted to highlight a few things that I saw on social media. These are all tweets from Justin Fenton. The first topic is the issue of when Asia's second letter was written. We know the deputy AG has been trying to claim it was after the actual date of March 2nd. According to Justin Fenton, quote, Asia's second letter was written to BCDC, where Syed would have been weeks later and included information from search warrant not known until later, he says. I've already covered before how the information in Asia's second letter was out there in the news, both the Baltimore Sun and TV news reports. In terms of Adnan being at BCDC not until weeks later, that's simply incorrect. I have here a letter that was sent from Chris Floor, one of Adnan's bail attorneys, and I'm reading for it. I respectfully request permission that my investigator, Andrew Davis, accompany me to see my client this morning at 9 a.m. My client is Adnan Syed, ID number 992005477, located in R35. He is a juvenile in protective custody. Thank you. Then fast forward to January 14th, 2000, so almost a year later, we have a letter being sent to Adnan at BCDC, Baltimore City Detention Center. He's still in protective custody. He still has the same ID number. He is still in the same wing, R35. And that argument about this letter possibly being written later based upon a change in location weeks later, simply not true. At least as early as March 4th, he is in the same location he's in January of the next year. Next, we have another tweet by Justin Fenton noting how the Deputy Attorney General, quote, laid out how Jay and Adnan had built a careful alibi, calling people being seen certain places. A billing log for Syed's private investigator shows him contacting all of those people in the initial period after arrest. Again, that's simply not true. The calls that afternoon were after Nisha to Patrick, they were to Phil, they were to Jen. The person they supposedly saw early that evening was not her real name, Kathy. None of those people were investigated by the PI in the initial period after arrest. The only person on the call log that afternoon who was contacted by the PI was Nisha. And what do we know about Nisha? Nisha has consistently said in every documented interview we have, whether notes or otherwise, that the call she remembers where Jay was on the phone was when Jay was working at his place of employment. In a trial, she says that is his job at the adult video store. We know on January 13th, Jay didn't have any job. He didn't have any job until weeks later. He didn't have the adult video store job until the end of January. So unless Adnan could somehow see the future and try to create an alibi back on January 13th about visiting Jay at his job, despite Jay having no job and certainly not the adult video store job, it simply makes no sense that this conspiracy to concoct an alibi makes any sort of sense, and it's certainly not consistent with what the Deputy AG said during closing. This third tweet by Justin says, quote, Syed's original defense counsel was seeking to exploit those people seeing Hay at the school at 3, with prosecution contention killed at 2:36 p.m. So basically what the state is trying to do here is to say there was a reasonable trial strategy of not contacting Asia McClain because the defense strategy at trial was to try to contradict the state's timeline by saying, well, wait a second, Debbie saw Hay still at school at 3, and therefore for that defense, Asia wouldn't have been helpful and in fact might have been harmful. Well, what do we know? We know that other tweets have said that Justin cited to 9 cases saying it is ineffective assistance of counsel not to contact an alibi witness, and basically these cases, including, I'm assuming, Court of Appeals of Maryland cases and Fourth Circuit cases, what they say is you can't decide upon an alibi strategy without first contacting a prospective alibi witness. Now, certainly, it could have been legitimate after talking to Asia to decide, we're not going to use that alibi, we're going to argue Debbie saw Hay at 3, and that defeats the state's timeline. Now, first of all, did Gutierrez actually do that effectively at trial? No. What do we know? We've discussed this in the podcast. It is true Debbie testified she saw Hay at 3. What we also know, though, is in the interview, Debbie said we weren't alone in that conversation. There was a third student. It was, quote-unquote, Takara. Takara asked Hay for a ride, and Hay said she couldn't give anyone a ride because she had no time. She had to pick up her cousin. Gutierrez never references this at trial, never draws out that Hay almost certainly would not be giving anyone a ride. But beyond that, which strategy sounds better to you? Going against the state's theory, the witnesses Inez, the defense witness Becky saying Hay left school at about 2:20, and using Asia as an alibi, I saw Adnan till 2:40, well past the time that Hay would have left school, or trying to argue against the state's timeline by using one witness, Debbie, who waffles, who changes her story, and maybe does say she sees Hay at 3. Again, it's not really for us to judge because that's not the point. The point is simply this, and this is the point that Justin has driven home throughout this trial, and that is when you, as defense counsel, are presented with a potential alibi witness, the only way to assess that witness's credibility, to decide whether to call them or not as a part of trial strategy, the only way to do that is to contact that alibi witness, to get their story, to assess their credibility, and at that point in time decide, I'm going to go with strategy A as opposed to strategy B. Didn't happen here. Overall, I think that the defense has made a strong case of ineffective assistance of counsel.
Hi, my name is Abraham Woronowitz. I was the original cell phone. Yeah. I was the original cell phone engineer for the trial back in 2000. And I'd like to say that prosecution put me in a really tough spot when I learned about the facts cover sheet and the legend on there and some of the other anomalies with the Exhibit 31. So I put in my affidavit for that back in October, and another affidavit today for the conclusion of the hearing. In short, I do believe there are still problems with Exhibit 31 and the other documents in there, and that if the cell phone records are unreliable for incoming calls, then I cannot validate my analysis from back then. Now, what I did back then, I'm very confident that I did the right thing. I did my engineering properly, that I took measurements properly. The question is, was I giving the right thing to measure?
Oh, did you hear? According to the state's expert, you get a 3.5 out of 4 in terms of your work, and he couldn't quite give you that 4 because you didn't do drive testing.
I don't think he saw my drive test maps.
Your testimony.
Well, I went drive testing with Uric and Murphy and Jay. We were all in the same car, and we visited some of the spots that were on the record, some of the calls where Jay claimed they were made.
Well, thank you for being here. I mean, I know you have no dog in this fight. Your only dog in the fight is having accurate data be used. And that's why you're here today, not for Anon, not for the state.
To me, it's more about engineering integrity. I need to be honest with my data from beginning to end, and I can't vouch for my data if it's based on unreliable data.
So this may very well be the last update for Undisclosed Live. I'm currently sitting in a car in a parking lot. It's too cold to record outside. We just came out of Justin's office from his press conference. About to head to dinner and doing one last, well, hopefully quick update of what happened today, because a lot went on. And I was asked to give a quick run through of what the end of Theo's arguments were and what Justin said in rebuttal. And I'm not even sure where to start, because Theory was all, like, literally from the beginning of the case. He went through, oh my gosh, he hit so much random stuff. And I feel like I have a unique perspective on that closing argument, because there probably isn't anyone who knows the defense file better than I do. I know every document he's talking about. I've read every single one, so I know what he's referring to. And in his closing, he keeps saying things like, I can't even give an example now, but the way he describes them makes them sound really sinister or something, or somehow relevant. And I'm like, I know exactly what he's talking about, and it's nothing remotely like what he's just describing. And Justin did, I think I already talked about this, but Justin did call him out for that, which I appreciated. Because he's relying on the fact that he's flashing records on a screen really quickly, making an argument and running, and knowing that no one's gonna like pull out those documents and carefully compare what he just said in court against what the document actually says. But newsflash, they don't match. What he is trying to use those documents to say is so strained. One of the many arguments we've heard as to why Gutierrez might not have called or talked to Asia. One was that Asia would be proof that, back up a bit. He was saying, well, Anon had a regular pattern. He only did 2 things after school. He only ever went to the school library, or not even that, because that was early in the day. He was like, Anon only ever went to track and then to the mosque, or he went and had sex with Hay, and then went to track and then to mosque. Those were the only 2 routines he ever had. So therefore, if Asia comes in and testifies, she would show that given that Anon only has 2 possible routines he ever engages in, he wasn't doing the first one, which means he was doing the going to Best Buy with Hay routine. Come on, high schoolers don't have 1 of 2 routines they always follow every day. It's not how the world works. But more importantly, as I think I mentioned earlier, the attorney's own notes of this conversation with Anon say, went to library often. The public one we're talking about here. So Gutierrez could not have believed that Anon only had 2 routines that consisted of either going straight to track or to Best Buy and then to track, because her own information shows one of his routines included going to the public library. Just like the 20 minutes later thing, I think it was one of the first days of the trial, he said, look at this paper showing she contacted track teammates. And this one says 20 minutes late. It means that Anon was 20 minutes late to practice, and it was damaging to his alibi, and that's why she didn't try harder. But that was the same witness that she did subpoena, never talked to. Subpoenaed him to show up. So okay, one, pretend Theory makes sense. That's what the note says. She still went ahead and subpoenaed him for the defense case. And let's go back to the fact that note says never spoke to that track teammate. So, given the note is very clear she never spoke to him, how'd she learn that Anon was 20 minutes late? The actual answer is that it has nothing to do with track at all. If you read the whole note, it says something like, call this track team member, left message. 20 minutes later, his father called back. Like, that's all it says. And he's up there going, oh, Anon was 20 minutes late to track practice. It proves Jay right. Although Jay's has Anon like an hour late, so whatever. So I was, during one of the bench conferences, I tried to go through and pull out some of my favorite theory quotes. I've got, this is really inspiring for the state. Even for the state, to see so many people come behind the defendant. Or, oh, and probably the best one of all, in arguing that the post-conviction should be denied. This is an opportunity to restore a bit of faith in the system. Dude, really? Really? We restore faith in the system by turning down a PCR hearing in which a prosecutor was accused of perjury and then failed to take the stand to defend himself? Restoring faith in the system is affirming that conviction? It's so tone deaf. Like, and what he was talking about, that should explain, is that, oh, defendant shouldn't get too many bites of the apple. It undermines our system if someone can keep litigating things and keep raising these claims. So maybe we should restore a little bit of faith in the system by not allowing Anon to do this here. And he said things like, the state doesn't take a position based on what's popular in the moment. Like, oh, all you silly little fans out there, you're just doing it because it's a fad, not because you're at all concerned about the justice system. Anyway, going back to more theory quotes. Long before Gutierrez fought for her life, she fought even harder for Mr. Syed. And then talking about Asia, the defense would have you believe that, like, Asia magically appeared all these years later, that she was a diamond in the rough, mined out of some dark cave. There were more flowery ones I probably have somewhere in my main notes. But there was, the way he writes, very florid, very soap opera-y. He talks that way too. So, at one point during closing arguments today, we have Thiru flash on his little screen, his big screen actually, one of the pages of the February 17th facts, which was the first subscriber activity report sent over. The more subscriber activity report, as Thiru would have it. I'm doing air quotes right now. He shows the top and says, oh look, it says here, fax sent on, date, and like some other numbers and fax header stuff. So look, everyone was on notice that this was a fax that was sent over. Huh. And Justin didn't argue this because why follow Thiru's stupid arguments? See, there's so many. But come on, this one, he's up there saying everyone should have known that this Exhibit 31 document was a fax machine, and therefore, a fax document, and therefore Gutierrez did know or should have known about the cover sheet, and there was no Brady violation. Here's the deal. You know what happened with that exhibit? The AT&T documents that were sent to AT&T for verification are not the same documents that were ultimately admitted as Exhibit 31 at trial. The documents that AT&T verified are a different set. So Kevin Urich sent 4 pages of records to AT&T to verify an affidavit, and he then took that affidavit and put it in court with a different version of the phone records. And I'll post a picture online to explain it better. But what happened is the documents sent to AT&T to verify do have fax information that show all the sheets were faxed. It's like a little fax header thing at the edges of it, and it's like, this is a fax. So AT&T verified one set that clearly shows it's a fax. We get to trial, we get to Exhibit 31. It's a different set of documents with all the fax headers cut off. I'm sure if he was asked, Kevin Urich would claim, oh, I found a set of documents that were easier to read or something. I don't even know what he'd claim. But the fact remains, Kevin Urich submitted documents as authenticated copies when they were not authenticated copies. He switched out the records that AT&T authenticated for his own preferred version of the documents. And the preferred version of the documents just happened not to have a fax header on them. It still drives me crazy. I saw it in the prosecutor's file, and you do not substitute out an authenticated record with and take that affidavit from the company and slap it on a different set of documents. no, that's not okay. What they did is not okay. And to have Theroux up there in closing arguments talking about this fax header as like proof that Gutierrez knew this stuff and that there was no Brady violation, when the freaking exhibit he used, or the state used at trial, had that cut off, that's ballsy. And I'm sure maybe some non-lawyers out there are like, okay, whatever. I mean, they were the same. They all these documents did have the same source. They were all various like photocopies or versions of the same underlying documents. But the data on them was different because one shows it's a fax and one does not. And it is a big deal to take authenticated records and to submit instead, without telling anyone, without telling AT&T, without telling the court, to submit a different version of the documents. And I'm ranting because it really pisses me off. But that's what they did. So anyway, this has been Undisclosed Live. I'd like to thank Karen, our producer, who's been here every day with us, following us around, and then we forget her and run off the directions, and we're like, oh God, where's Karen? We need to record something. And thanks to Audio Boom for helping us put this together. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with a more full-length version of what happened at the PCR hearing.
Perfect.
Friday, the Maryland Court of Appeals agreed to hear Adnan Syed's case.
It's a huge victory for the 33-year-old.
In a stunning twist, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals ruled in favor of Syed without any hearing and sent the case back to the trial court.
Hi, Auntie Shameen. This is Rabia.
Hi, Rabia. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. I just wanted to know how you are feeling after the court ruling.
We were so happy. Yeah, because Yusuf, he came down to say, Mom, look, Rabia, she texted me. We were so happy.
And you spoke to Adnan too?
He called me and said, Adnan, he said, Mom, I talked to lawyer, and he was also so excited. He said, finally, it's looked like God accepted our prayer.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabia. Wa alaikum assalam.
That was Adnan's mom, who I call affectionately Auntie Shamim. And she was speaking to me this morning about the recent order issued by the Maryland Court of Special Appeals. We're getting a lot of questions about what this order means. Why has the Court of Special Appeals remanded the case to the circuit court? What does that mean in terms of the post-conviction? Does it mean Asia gets to testify? Does it mean Adnan gets a new trial? So, in order to break it down in layman's terms, we thought we'd ask Colin to please, who, by the way, has done so much extensive writing and research on the legal aspects of the case, to explain to our listeners what the implications of this order are.
On Monday, there was a very interesting development in the current appeal by Adnan. The Court of Special Appeals of Maryland issued a stay of that appeal and remanded the case back down to the circuit court. To understand what that means, let's go back to the start. On February 28, 1999, Adnan was arrested for the murder of Heyman Lee. The next 2 days, March 1st and March 2nd, Asia McLean, a fellow Woodlawn student, sent Adnan letters in jail. According to those letters, Asia recalled seeing Adnan on January 13th, the day that Hay disappeared, in the Woodlawn Public Library, which is right next to the high school. Despite these letters, Asia was never called as an alibi witness at trial. After Adnan was convicted, Rabia went to visit him in jail, and he showed her copies of the 2 letters sent by Asia. Using the phone number on one of those letters, Rabia reached out to Asia and eventually got her to sign an affidavit in which Asia recalled seeing Adnan in the Woodlawn Public Library up until 2:40 p.m. on January 13th. Asia also indicated that she had never been contacted by defense counsel in connection with Adnan's trial. Subsequently, Adnan had a direct appeal. A direct appeal is an appeal based upon errors that are evident from the trial record. Because Asia wasn't part of the trial record, she couldn't be raised as part of the direct appeal. Adnan lost that direct appeal. Thereafter, Adnan brought a collateral appeal. A collateral appeal is an appeal based upon errors that are not evident from the trial record. It's where he claims he received the ineffective assistance of counsel based upon numerous errors by his defense counsel. In connection with the appeal hearing for that collateral appeal, and this is about a decade after Adnan was initially convicted, his attorney sends a private investigator to the West Coast to contact Asia to convince her to testify at the appeal hearing. This freaks Asia out. She's not sure why she was never contacted at the time of the initial trial, and she's worried about the possibility that she's helping someone who actually is guilty of murder. Based upon these concerns, she makes a call to Kevin Urich, one of the prosecutors from Adnan's initial trial. After that conversation with Urich, Asia doesn't testify at the appeal hearing. On the other hand, Urich does. And according to Urich's testimony at Adnan's appeal hearing in the circuit court, when he spoke to Asia, she told him she only wrote the affidavit due to pressure from Adnan's family and to get them off of her back. Understandably, based upon Urich's testimony and Asia not testifying, Adnan's appeal is denied. He's not given a new trial. As a result, Adnan brings an appeal with the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. And while that appeal is still lingering, again, we have Cyril last fall, and Sarah Koenig reaches out to Asia. Asia has a very different story to tell about her interaction with Urich. And eventually, Asia submits an affidavit dated January 13, 2015, exactly 16 years to the day after Heyman Lee disappeared. Let's look at a couple of excerpts from that affidavit. He, meaning Urich, told me there was no merit to any claims that Syed did not get a fair trial. Urich discussed the evidence of the case in a manner that seemed designed to get me to think Syed was guilty, and that I should not bother participating in the case by telling what I knew about January 13, 1999. Urich convinced me into believing that I should not participate in any ongoing proceedings. Urich and I discussed the affidavit that I had previously provided to Chaudhry, meaning Rabia Chaudhry. I wanted to know why I was being contacted if they already had the affidavit on file, and what the ramifications of that document were. I never told Urich that I recanted my story or affidavit about January 13th, 1999. In addition, I did not write the March 1999 letters or the affidavit because of pressure from Syed's family. I did not write them to please Syed's family or to get them off my back. Based upon this new affidavit, Adnan's attorney moves to supplement his application for leave to appeal the circuit court's denial of Adnan's motion for a new trial. That's the supplement made to the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. So the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland initially had a hearing on Adnan's appeal scheduled for June 9th. But in response to these new allegations by Asia, they decide we can't resolve this case. They decide in the interest of justice, these revelations need to be handled by the circuit court, because the Court of Appeals can't handle issues that were not heard initially as part of the fact-finding by the circuit courts. They remand the case. That's what they did on Monday. They stayed the current appeal. They're not going to have the hearing in June. They sent the case back down to the circuit court for this purpose. Purpose being, Adnan can now file to reopen his post-conviction proceeding with the circuit court so that Asia can testify. What's the standard the court's going to use to decide whether to reopen the hearing? The question's going to be, is reopening the hearing in the interest of justice? The exact same standard the Court of Special Appeals used in remanding the case back down to the circuit court. Maryland courts have never defined the phrase in the interest of justice. What they have done is to give several illustrations of cases in which it's in the interest of justice to grant a new trial or to reopen a hearing. One of those examples is prosecutorial misconduct. And so Adnan's attorney, in connection with his appeal, has cited to a few Maryland cases. One of those cases is a case known as Campbell, another is a case known as Curry. These are cases in which, on the one hand, in one case, the prosecutor dissuaded a witness from testifying at trial for the defense, and in another case, the prosecutor misrepresented certain facts to the jury. And so Adnan's attorney is claiming is this case is similar to Campbell and Curry. The court, in the interest of justice, should reopen. We should be allowed to have Asia testify and present other evidence to prove ineffective assistance of counsel. Prosecution has not yet cited any cases that stand against the proposition this hearing should be reopened. They'll have their opportunity now to claim here are reasons why Asia should not be allowed to testify. In my opinion, based upon my review of Maryland case law, it's exceedingly likely the circuit court will in fact reopen the proceeding and will allow Asia to testify. Okay, assuming Asia testifies, the circuit court can do one of two things. One, they can stick with their prior decision and still deny Adnan a new trial, or two, based upon Asia's testimony and other evidence, they could decide to grant Adnan a new trial. In either case, the losing party can appeal to the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. That court has already granted an appeal. That court could either affirm the lower court or they could reverse it. And then the Court of Special Appeals is the intermediate appellate court in Maryland. Whoever loses in that court could appeal it up to the Court of Appeals of Maryland. So ultimately, probably it'll be the Court of Appeals of Maryland, the state Supreme Court in Maryland decides, assuming Asia's allowed to testify, is her testimony enough to give Adnan a new trial?
Special thanks to Amar Naji, our sound editor, Ramiro Marquez, who created our theme music, and Baluki, who provided our logo. Dennis Robinson is our executive producer. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is undisclosedpod. Tweet us your questions and comments using the hashtag undisclosed.
I'm Jeremy Helton, and this is the first of 6 installments of Audioboom's exclusive Q&A with the creators of Undisclosed. Rabia Chaudhry is here with me to answer listener questions about the case of Adnan Syed. Now let's get started. This question is from Kylie Johnston. If Hay was strangled, wouldn't the state be able to compare the bruises on her neck to the size of Adnan's hands?
No. I think that's something that we think might happen in TV or something. I don't think it happens in reality like that. In fact, what's interesting is a medical examiner actually testified that it's even possible that it was not a manual strangulation and it was with a rope or something. Like that there's even that possibility is open. It makes sense. I can understand because, it takes a lot of pressure to do that. It's not the 10 seconds that the state argued. It takes a number of minutes and it should leave bruising, but apparently it doesn't. I think in the case of rope and other types of implements if they're used, that's more obvious. And in this case, I guess it was so broad, wide open, vague that the medical examiner said, yeah, it's possible, but we're not sure.
This question comes from Anne-Marie Amoedo. She asks, in Serial, Will mentions that it wasn't unusual for Jay to drop off or pick up Adnan at practice. If Jay and Adnan were just casual acquaintances, why is this the case?
I don't actually think that's accurate, though. I think it wasn't very common for Jay to have Adnan's car. I think it only happened once or twice. So it was really weird for me to hear Will say that. In fact, I think at some point Jay said that, I don't know if he testified, but at some point he said that was maybe the only time. But it was not unusual they'd be riding together, but it was unusual that Adnan would have just given him the car. I think it only happened a couple of times. So I don't really know. But other than that, what generally seemed to happen with Adnan was that if he was at school, the track practice was on the other side of the campus, is that he would ask people as they were heading out to give him a ride to the other side of campus, basically.
Stella Porto has been listening to episode 4 of Undisclosed, and it made her think that Jen's testimony was also influenced by the police. Does this sound crazy?
No, it doesn't sound crazy. I mean, so for Jay, the police had to somehow corroborate Jay, right? One way they corroborated his story was cell phone records. But of course, they made sure his statement kept changing until it matched the cell phone records. And we're going to talk about those in a future episode. But the other way is that he's brought in a third party to help corroborate him. That's Jen. And Jen is his closest friend, and she has said and testified that I would do anything for him, right? He is like my heart. And so if Jay... And then what's really odd is that the first trial, Gutierrez got Jay to admit that after everything had happened, after she had given the police statements, that Jen was angry at Jay and didn't speak to him for a while. So it makes me wonder if it's something that Jay said, listen, I need you to do this for me. Just give these statements, do this for me. And I need it, right? It'll help me basically in my deal. And she just complied. So it's perfectly possible that the police were not even necessary to tell Jen what to do or not do. And I find that it would be really weird for them to do that because she had a lawyer and her mother with her when she went to actually give an official statement. But if she had already, and she had spoken to Jay already, they had spoken apparently, according to her, they'd spoken the 13th, when he said everything went down. But even after that, they had spoken. And they could easily have just coordinated their stories to the best, But they didn't do a good job because she also kept messing it up and added things like the sorority party. And if you listen to her statement, you can tell, when somebody just rambles, they're not quite sure, if they're landing the right points.
This question comes from Earl Adsley. He wants to know, could the police or the prosecution be charged criminally if misconduct in Adnan's case is proven?
One of the most frustrating things about these types of cases, whether it's police brutality or police misconduct in a case like this or prosecutorial misconduct, is that there's very little accountability. I highly doubt in any circumstance that the officers would ever get charged criminally. They could be liable in a civil suit, and that has happened in a couple of other exonerations in Maryland and Baltimore with the same detectives. They've been slapped with some lawsuits, which I think one of the lawsuits just kind of was dismissed because the litigant didn't follow up. The other one is active. So I don't think there are ever criminal repercussions. And for prosecutors, I have only heard one case in which a prosecutor, having withheld exculpatory evidence for 20 years, ended up spending 10 days in prison for that. So the power balance is so out of whack that there's really no hope for it. And the best I could hope for in a situation like this, which is something that I'm a resident of Maryland. To me, a lot of these positions are elected. And you know what? There's other ways to speak to power. If you can't do anything else, you shouldn't be holding office in certain cases.
With the inaccurate timelines, the conflicting witness testimony, and the disappearing evidence, Haley Robinson wants to know, is there any way to prove that the case against Adnan is completely unfair?
I think that's exactly what we're doing in Undisclosed. The whole purpose of this podcast is to really get into the details and show the public what the police did and didn't do, what the prosecutor did and didn't do, and what Gutierrez did and did not do. And show all the incredible inconsistencies. Because, you know, Sarah talks about inconsistencies in Serial, but from kind of a 30,000 feet view, right? Like a much broader view than getting really into the details. And I think our podcast is doing exactly what Haley is mentioning. Now, in terms of legally, the time to bring all this up, because the way appeals work is once you have issues in front of a court, you can't keep adding stuff to them. That's, you know, the court has to decide on the issues you've already presented. Now, if we were to get a new trial, which is what we want, that's what we're hoping for eventually, all of this can be raised. And in that case, I think the state would just say, we're not going to try this case anymore. We're just going to give them a plea deal.
So how close are we to a retrial?
We're not that close. The problem is every decision can be appealed. So let's say, you know, the case has just been sent down to the circuit court. Let's say the circuit court allows Asia's testimony and says, okay, based on her testimony, you know, we're going to include her testimony, and so the state can then appeal that, right? Or they're going to give her, we're going to rule that he gets a new trial. The state can then appeal that. If we lose, then we can appeal that, right? So then it could really go up to the Supreme Court of Maryland and then come back down. It could take a long time. Now, the only way we could really avoid that if the state of Maryland wants a real fight, they could keep appealing and we could keep appealing each other's decisions. The only way to really avoid that would be to do kind of what we are trying to do is find the kind of evidence that's just irrefutable. That there's just nothing, you know, that it would be such a public embarrassment for them to keep fighting that they can't do it anymore. And to present that to the public and make it known that we found the smoking gun.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next Monday for a new episode of Undisclosed, and again on Wednesday for another installment of our exclusive Q&A with the producers. This is Audio Boom. I'm Jeremy Helton, and this is the second of 6 installments of Audio Boom's exclusive Q&A with the creators of Undisclosed. Our first question is from Reagan Pasternak. She wants to know, is it possible that the police might have planted Adnan's or Hayes' DNA on items gathered into evidence?
I don't think so, because if they'd done that, they would have used it already. I mean, they wouldn't have done that and then just let it sit there. So I don't think that's a realistic possibility. If they were going that far, they would have just gone ahead and introduced the evidence, and they didn't. And that would have required a level of wrongdoing that I don't think was present here. I do think they thought they had the right guy. I don't think this was a case of them trying to frame someone or trying to convict someone they knew was innocent. So they weren't trying to fabricate evidence like that. What they were doing was making sure the case they put together was one that could convict Adnan.
And this question comes from Janice Pope. Do you think the person or persons who concealed Hayes' body knew the location in advance of the burial?
Maybe. I doubt it, just because it's such an impromptu place to try and bury a body. If it was someone who was planning ahead, I do not think they would have chosen there.
Tool Lean wants to know, if Adnan told you tomorrow confidentially that he killed Hay, would you continue the podcast and assist in his defense?
First of all, there wouldn't be confidentially. I'm not his attorney. I'm just a podcaster and blogger. So I mean, there's no attorney-client privilege thing going on. And second, it'd be game over. I mean, I'd probably have questions for him just out of curiosity, like, well, how do we explain these facts here? But no, that would be the end. I would make a episode about it and would be really proud for solving the case. If he was actually guilty, I think the worst thing that could happen is the message to get out that it's okay for cops to do this. It's okay for detectives to bend the rules to get a conviction because the guy was guilty anyway. No, it's not. Like, there is no harmless railroading of a case. So yeah, in that respect, I think it'd be horrible if it came out that, oh, the detectives cheated essentially, but, you know, we can find out now it's okay they cheated because this guy was guilty. They had lots of cases. We know that they've had other convictions. These detectives were involved in convicting innocent people of murder. So even if Adnan was guilty, there's still others out there, I'm sure, who they have falsely convicted, and no one knows their cases, no one's heard from them, and whatever Adnan's case ends up being, this should not impact their chances to be heard and for justice to finally get done. For a long time, when I first started out, I thought the best evidence of Adnan's innocence was that if he was actually guilty, this wouldn't have been so hard. They could have put a case together much easier, and they wouldn't have needed to go to such lengths. The fact they couldn't find legit evidence suggested it wasn't there at all. I now think, based on new evidence and just putting old stuff together, that it's very unlikely Adnan was involved. It just doesn't work out logistically. But even based on what was shown at trial, just the fact they had to go to such lengths, they haven't made a case. You can't build a case out of a bunch of maybe could-have beens.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next Monday for a new episode of Undisclosed, and again on Wednesday for another installment of our exclusive Q&A with the producers. This is Audio Boom.
Get the crown. Why is there no attack speed relics? This is bullshit. This is bullshit. Fuck, I'm gonna need to find another podcast now.
Welcome back to another installment of Audio Boom's exclusive Q&A with the creators of Undisclosed. Last week, Rabia Chaudhry answered questions from listeners about the case of Adnan Syed. This week, we'll be talking about the future of Undisclosed and its unique relationship to Serial. Our first question comes from Earl Adsley. He wants to know how Adnan feels about Undisclosed as compared to Serial.
So Adnan has not heard Undisclosed at all, and I haven't provided him with any of the transcripts at all. With Serial, he was getting transcripts at some point. He doesn't really have the ability to listen to podcasts necessarily. But Adnan had always gotten, I had been sending, and others have been sending him copies of Susan and Colin's blogs. And he knows that, generally speaking, like, we're basing a lot of the content on the blogs, along with just new information that we're finding as we go along. So he doesn't know a lot about it, actually. He hasn't heard it, and I don't think anybody sent him a transcript, so. But I think he is, he's known me since he was 13, and he, of course, my relationship is different than him and Sarah, where he does trust me, and he knows that basically,
welcome to a special Undisclosed Explainer. My name is Rabia Chaudhry, and I'm joined with my colleagues Susan Simpson and Colin Miller. And we just wanted to put out something short and sweet in response to some surprise news that we all got this past Friday. Now, I was traveling on Friday. I happened to be heading to Austin for a conference when I got a call from Adnan's attorney, Justin Brown, who let me know that he had received a call from the courthouse that the judge had issued an order in response to his motion to reopen the post-conviction proceedings. Now, I was a little bit surprised because the order came a little more quickly than I anticipated, because I believe Adnan's response had been filed just in the past couple of weeks, so not too much time had passed. And of course, the happier news for us was that the judge had granted Justin's motion. And so we've gotten a lot of questions about what this order means. It's a pretty short order. You can find it on Justin's website. If you follow him on Twitter or just Google it, really, you'll find the order. But it seems to include allowing Asia McClain's testimony in, allowing in new evidence about the cell phone tower and fax cover sheet, and also exploring issues of prosecutorial misconduct. So I'm going to now turn it over to Colin and Susan to kind of parse out what this means, what it's going to look like, and what the next steps will probably be.
There are two major parts to the court's order. The first part has to deal with Asia McClain, and the court decided, quote, after reviewing petitioner's filings and respondent's consolidated response, this court concludes that, in its own discretion, reopening the post-conviction proceedings would be in the interest of justice for all parties. This will allow the petitioner to introduce the January 13th, 2015 affidavit from McClain, the potential testimony of McClain, and relevant evidence concerning petitioner's claims of ineffective counsel and alleged prosecutorial misconduct. In other words, Asia gets to testify, and the parties can bring in all associated evidence concerning Asia's testimony and Gutierrez's failure to call her at the time of Adnan's original trial.
Yeah, and Susan, to me that seems pretty broad because Judge Welch says any relevant evidence, so presumably that can mean evidence of disciplinary action against Gutierrez. It could be other witnesses who would be able to say what her mental state and workload was like in 99 and 2000. I mean, it just seems really broad in what would be allowed.
Well, I think the judge recognizes that there's no way to effectively examine these issues in artificial isolation from the rest of the record. Now, it's the Asia issue that this part of the order concerns, but in order to fully explore what happened here and why Gutierrez didn't call her, whether she ever attempted to contact her, whether she ever investigated the potential alibi that Asia could have given at trial, that requires looking at things beyond simply Asia's testimony or the letter she wrote. It necessarily includes things like Gutierrez's record at that time period, her abilities at that time period, and general evidence impacting her ability to be an effective counsel for Adnan.
Yeah, we know that in his most recent filing, Justin submitted an affidavit from Ken Wisher, a former associate of Gutierrez, about the alibi notice. We know there was an affidavit from Krista about how Woodlawn students consider the Woodlawn Public Library part of the Woodlawn School campus. So presumably both of those are fair game and can be considered by the judge as well. So, I mean, this is really, to me, a home run. It allows the judge to consider anything relevant whatsoever, which I think is huge in sorting out these factual issues in the case.
Do you also think that would allow Justin to introduce evidence of, if it's helpful and relevant, of Christina's medical condition and how that might have impacted her performance or her caseload at the time, things that we've talked about in the past episodes?
I think it's a possibility. The difficulty is we're not entirely sure of the medical condition, so I'm not sure in terms of that what can be presented, but I think certainly the defalcations, the amount of recovery against her, the other cases we've mentioned about failing to contact alibi witnesses and any other assorted misconduct by Gutierrez, I think all would be something circumstantially that could have bearing upon the claim of ineffective assistance.
And her history of a failure to contact alibi witnesses is absolutely relevant, I think.
And when it comes to the Asia issue, there's also the question of why she did not appear for the first post-conviction hearing. So with regard to that, I'm assuming those are questions that will be explored. And what I understand is that Asia apparently took notes when she spoke to Kevin Urich. So do you think also that the prosecutor, Kevin Urich, would also be called to counter Asia's testimony, or any thoughts on that?
Well, Anand's attorney could call him too, for that matter.
Yeah, I don't know whether either side would have that incentive to call Yurik to testify. Certainly, Asia will testify. The rules of evidence don't apply at PCR hearings. The notes themselves could be admissible, even if they're not directly admissible. She could use them to refresh her recollection. These are events from a few years ago, so those would certainly be helpful one way or another at the hearing.
So you don't think it would serve the state to call Yurik to counter, like, with his recollection of the conversation?
Yeah, and the question is, what's their level of concern about Justin's cross-examination of him and what that might reveal? It's risky. The second part of Judge Welch's order says that Justin can present relevant evidence relating to A, trial counsel's alleged failure to cross-examine respondent's expert on the reliability of the cell tower location evidence, and B, potential prosecutorial misconduct during trial. What this means basically is that the cover sheet that Susan was able to uncover about incoming calls being unreliable for determining location is now on the table. It can be used to prove either ineffective assistance of counsel or a Brady violation, in other words, prosecutorial misconduct. I read that possibly as anything, including Crime Stoppers, other potential Brady violations being fair game.
Yeah, so it's clear that the court is interested in hearing about the Asia issue and the failure of Gutierrez to adequately address the cell phone evidence. But like I said, in order to address those issues, it wouldn't make sense for the court to put blinders on and to only look at things that say on their face, this is related to Asia, this is related to the AT&T evidence, because it is part of a larger story. The court's decision will likely end up being based on those two specific issues, but in order to evaluate them, I expect that this hearing will be covering a lot of ground.
A big question that people have, and in fact, we all kind of have, is the timing of the hearing. So I keep getting asked over and over, when is this hearing going to take place? Now, the judge's order said that the parties have to come together within 10 days to set a date. So we will get that date in the next 7 to 9 days, maybe even within this week. And while I tend to think that in situations like this, where, first of all, you have a judge that only has this one case on his docket, but the courts want to try to dispense with things before holidays, but I have a feeling because of the very broad set of issues that the hearing could potentially touch on, that the parties will need a few months to prepare. But that's just my thought. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I doubt it'll be 2015, but it sounds like it's going to be early 2016, which again is lightning fast for the court system. This has all moved so much faster than could have reasonably been anticipated at the start.
Yeah, I'm thinking early 2016 too, and I'm thinking, and I'm hoping actually maybe no earlier than late January, February, because I happen to be out of the country in January. So, but we'll know in the next 7 to 10 days what that date will be. Another question that I've gotten is whether or not Adnan will be present, and also whether or not the hearing will be public or televised or streamed or anything like that. Adnan will be present for the hearing. A lot of us will be present for the hearing. Whether or not it's televised or recorded or all of those things are considerations for the court. They're going to have to decide how they're going to do it. I remember when we were anticipating the hearing happening over the summer at the Court of Special Appeals, there were conversations between the court and Justin that they were looking for an appropriate courtroom to accommodate the public interest because the Court of Special Appeals has a very small room. Now we're going to be back in circuit court. Courtrooms are bigger, but obviously it will be a lot of people trying to get into there. And what would make sense is for the judge to allow it to be televised so that there isn't such a rush to get in the door itself. But that's going to have to be something that's worked out with all the parties involved. It'll be up to the judge. I mean, some judges are just not happy with that kind of stuff and they don't want it.
Yeah, and that leaves the question of the possible outcomes here. What we now have are a few issues that could lead to Judge Welch granting Adnan a new trial. One, the judge could now, after Asia testifies and other evidence is presented, reverse his prior ruling and find Gutierrez was ineffective for failing to contact her. That would be a new trial. The judge could find Gutierrez was ineffective for failing to question the cell tower evidence. That would be a new trial. Or the judge could find a Brady violation, that the prosecution failed in its disclosures regarding the cell tower evidence. That would also be a new trial. Now, in any of those cases, the state would almost certainly appeal to the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. If the judge rejects relief on all three of those grounds, then in that case, Justin almost certainly would appeal to the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland. Now, of course, you might remember the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland has already granted an appeal on the issue of whether Gutierrez was ineffective in failing to ask about a plea bargain. So whatever's going to happen at this original PCR level, it's going to be appealed to the Court of Special Appeals. And then again, whichever party loses there, almost certainly the losing party will appeal to Maryland's highest court, the Maryland Court of Appeals. So it would be nice to think we'll have possible relief soon, but this is going to be a protracted process. It's going to take time before Maryland has its final ruling on the issue.
So the other question is a hypothetical. We're not close to this yet, and this could be putting the cart before the horse. But we've also had people ask whether or not Adnan could be released if the trial judge were to find that there was either a Brady violation or ineffective assistance. And if at that point Adnan could be released on bail pending the appeals, which could take a year or years to be fully resolved. And yes, that is a possibility. Defendants in state court cases, like in Maryland, can be released on bail pending the appeals if a trial court decision is rendered that finds they should have a new trial or otherwise reverses their conviction. However, that's going to be a case-by-case consideration. And right now, I don't have a sense of whether or not it's likely that Adnan would be granted bail.
Well, that's it for our special undisclosed explainer, but I do want to, before we wrap up, thank our listeners for the tremendous amount of support that you guys have shown us, especially on Friday. I mean, we get it all the time, but on Friday, the outpouring was incredible. I mean, it's still overwhelming to me, and I'm still trying to kind of emotionally wrap my head around it. I want to remind listeners that, you know, Serial and Undisclosed and all these things have happened in the last year, but our effort for the post-conviction appeal, our effort to get Asia specifically in front of a judge began in 2009. That's when I believe we hired Justin and that this process began. So it's been a long time coming, but you know, your tweets, your messages, and your support mean so very much to all of us. So thank you for that. So stay tuned later tonight, Undisclosed Addendum. That's going to drop at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And so we will see you then.
This is the final installment of Audioboom's exclusive Q&A with Susan Simpson. In it, we talk about the making of the podcast and the critics' response. Our first question comes from Olivia Cueva, and she wants to know, what equipment do you use?
So when we first started and just kind of figuring out what the heck we were all doing, I just used my headset mic, and then we just got Audacity, and we had some volunteers help out a bit. After that, we got better mics, eventually convinced everyone to get better mics, so we're all using Blue Yeti mics now. And we have learned a lot. I went from having zero sound knowledge to having a little sound knowledge. Obviously, it's still a totally new world for me, but I can at least understand the terminology to some extent.
Olivia also wanted to know what you like most about podcasting.
That's assuming I like it. No, it's really different. It's not something I've experienced with. It's not a format I'm used to using, and it's almost frustrating sometimes because I'm used to writing where I can carefully lay out everything. There's no risk of a misstatement or accidentally not being precise enough because you can just go back and edit it. Whereas with a podcast, oftentimes I'll say something and then realize later, oh, that was not as precise as I meant it to be, or that may have given the wrong impression, and you can't just as easily, delete and make a quick edit. So it's definitely a change both in the making of it and the revising process. But it's been fun just because it's new, I think. It's fun to pick up something totally new and just see how far you can take it.
If you could go back, are there things that you'd do differently for the first few episodes?
Yeah, well, a lot of people like criticized us for like not making a better first episode, and I'm like, you can't. We had to do the first episode to learn. There's no way we could have made a good episode first try. I mean, I couldn't anyway. Maybe so. I don't think there's any way of avoiding that. I mean, it's a learning process, and we had to go through it. So, we are working on going back and fixing some of the audio issues now that we know how to. So, we're addressing that. But no, I wouldn't do it differently in that sense because I didn't know what I didn't know.
How do you feel about what the critics are saying about Undisclosed?
I remember some of the first reviews were comparing us to Serial. Like, actually, no, the reviews are still comparing us to Serial. I think like last week, 2 more came out saying Undisclosed is not the new Serial. I'm like, no, duh, it's not. We're 3 attorneys making a podcast, and we're being compared to the best podcast of all time. So that's a compliment in a way, because if we really were as horrible as they're saying, no one would bother to make that comparison. Like, I think The Guardian had a review of us in, like, their TV and radio section. I'm like, if we're as bad as you're saying, why are you bothering to write a review? So it's, you know, it's kind of funny. I get frustrated when the reviewers have clearly not listened to the podcast. But otherwise, it's not that they're untrue. We are learning. We've gotten better. And I know from, like, a technical standpoint, we're miles away from, like, NPR quality. We're not going to get there. It's on our goals not to get there. But I've listened to podcasts for a long time, and I know that, I mean, there's a lot worse than us out there. They're still good. So I'm not concerned about that part of a production. And, you know, we'll keep learning. Hopefully our last episode's our best episode.
It's been great reading listener questions and going behind the scenes with Undisclosed. Be sure to check out the Audioboom blog, where we'll have more listener questions and audio extras from Rabia, Susan, and their co-producer, Colin Miller. And of course, you don't want to miss the next episode of Undisclosed. I'm Jeremy Helton. Thanks for listening. This is Audioboom. Welcome to Audioboom's exclusive Q&A with Rabia Chaudhry. In this final installment, we asked Rabia to weigh in on the impact of Undisclosed. What do you think it is about Serial and Undisclosed that's captured people's attention?
I think people have always been fascinated with real crime. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon, right? Whether it's the Dateline, I mean, I grew up watching this stuff, you know. I think there are 24-hour networks that focus on just real crime stories. So that's always a source of fascination. And what Sarah was really, able to do very well, other than just the production value alone was really, really wonderful. I mean, the music was incredible, right? But was that she was able to keep a level of ambiguity that kept people hooked, right? It was always like, did he, didn't he? Like, and this is, and it wasn't contrived. This is the most fascinating aspect of this case. You can take almost any part of it and you can read it lots of different ways, and people do. People can just pick up one thing, like Adnan, like Adnan calling her the night before, and that can seem really like something really nefarious. But at the same time, people are like, well, yeah, but he was seeing somebody else. And, What does that mean? And we know in her diary, like from the reading her diary, you can read it different ways. So there's just no, and it's almost like because there's no smoking gun, that's what kept people hooked. Although I think people wanted it at the very end. They wanted like some closure. And for me, I want to ask the public this question because I'm so close to the case that for me, it wasn't like an entertainment or I could not enjoy Serial. Serial stressed me the hell out, and Serial stressed Adnan out, and all of us close to Adnan out. So I wish I could have enjoyed Serial the way other people had. But I think that's what the fascination is. I think people like real crime, and I think people are hoping in the next couple of seasons that Serial also does like some true crime stuff because a murder mystery is exciting. And then there was a lot of layers in this story, right? You have the cultural layers, the looking into this religious community that nobody really ever hears about. These are two young, attractive, high school kids. We remember that age, remember, the songs and the prom and all these things. Gutierrez is a fascinating character. There's characters, right? So now with Undisclosed, I feel like, our following is, of course, it's going to be a fraction of Serials. I think most people's following is a fraction of Serials. But it is people who are really hardcore into the case. And those are the people who I'm blown out of the water by, because those are the people who take notes and they come up with 3-page long theories and they'll email, and I'm like, I literally don't even have the time to read. I can't see myself doing this for a case if I wasn't deeply connected to it for some reason. And I'm amazed by that. And I think it's great though. I think because those are the people who are not taking it as entertainment. They're taking it as something that's really real. I think our undisclosed audience are the people who are this is some real stuff. It's real life.
How do you feel about the degree to which Adnan's story has become entertainment?
So there was definitely some discomfort, but I think at the same time that entertainment value was necessary. We needed it. If Sarah could have told the story, and what if nobody listened to it? You know what? We would have not have the Innocence Project on board. We wouldn't be anywhere close to where we are today. So it was a necessary difficulty.
Do you view Undisclosed as part of a larger social justice movement?
I absolutely do. I mean, I think that, and I have been an activist and advocate on a broad array of issues totally unconnected to the case. But when I see a phenomenon like Serial, and part of my work is actually, I work on a project that's funded by Google and Facebook on using social media tools for advocacy. And podcasting fits right into that. So I see now the power of podcasting, which for people, if you can package it in a way that they can just listen to it while they're on the go and jogging or whatever, it's so much easier to get the information to people than Susan had written blogs that are 40 pages long, right? Very few people are gonna read that. I think it's a really powerful tool, and I think it should be, and I hope that this is, and Sarah did it with Serial, shines a light on the ambiguities in the criminal justice system, on how things can go very wrong, on how people can get convicted and get ridiculous, even if you think Adnan's guilty at 17 with no priors, a life sentence plus 30 years mean he's going to die in prison. Is that an ethical sentence? Who are we as a country? And what's really fascinating is the response from international audiences who are appalled that a juvenile was given a life sentence, right? With no just basically it's a death sentence. And I think it opens up a lot of doors. I think in the state of Maryland, because I'm a Maryland resident, I think there's we're now seeing that people are interested in looking at alternate ways to get around the system. The system is really hard to fight once you're convicted. So the establishment of something like an innocence commission that would work outside of the courts, but be commissioned by the governor, let's say, are good ways. But I think it's showing people how easily, when you are arrested and charged, the fight is 80% over for you. You've already lost 80 or 90% of the battle.
It's been great reading listener questions and going behind the scenes with Undisclosed. Be sure to check out the Audioboom blog, where we'll have more listener questions and audio extras from Rabia, Susan, and their co-producer Colin Miller. And of course, you don't want to miss the next episode of Undisclosed. Thanks for listening. This is Audioboom.
I'm joined here today by Dr. Lee Lavati. She is the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office in Detroit, Michigan. She's also a Clinical Associate Professor of Pathology at the University of Michigan. Dr. Lavati has graciously agreed to look at the autopsy report for Hae Min Lee, the autopsy photos, and the testimony by the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy. Now, before we start, a couple of caveats. First, the autopsy photos are black and white, they're not color, and they're fairly low resolution. And secondly, unfortunately, the state's file does not include any photos of the body when it was still buried and before it was disinterred. Okay, so with those caveats in place, let's go ahead and jump into some of these medical findings, and let's start with the process known as livor mortis. And so, Dr. Lavati, can you please tell me about the process that is known as livor mortis?
Yes, livor mortis refers to the red-purple discoloration of the skin that you see on bodies after death. It is a physical process that occurs after death wherein the blood settles within the dependent areas of the body based on gravity. Meaning, if you die on your back and are left in that position, the blood will then settle into the back half of your body. It's a process that becomes visible or evident about 2 to 4 hours after death, and it can take up to 8 to 12 hours to become the most prominent or visible and to fix. Now, fixation happens when there's breakdown or hemolysis of the blood within the blood vessels that occurs after death. And so if a body is moved after lividity is fixed, the lividity will not shift and resettle into the new body position. So if the body that was on its back was then flipped onto its stomach after fixation, the lividity would remain on the back half of the body. Now, this 8 to 12 hours is merely just an estimate or a guide, because like all of the changes that happen to the body after death, it is very environmental and temperature dependent. And this guide of 8 to 12 hours was based on what they call temperate conditions, meaning about room temperature 60 to 80 degrees. So if the time frame, if the temperature is warmer than that, this time frame could be accelerated, and if the temperatures are colder, then the time frame could be even more delayed.
Okay, and the autopsy report for Hae Min Lee says that her body had fixed frontal lividity. Is that consistent with what you saw in the autopsy photos?
Well, the 5 black and white photos that I viewed of the body taken at the morgue, because they were black and white and because of the changes of decomposition and dirt that was left on the body in some of those photographs, honestly, I cannot tell the lividity pattern based on those photos alone. However, the report and the medical examiner testimony were very clear that this was anterior or frontal lividity. So knowing that and looking at the photos, there's no variation in the shading of gray from the left half of the body to the right half. So the photographs would therefore be consistent with fixed, full, frontal, or anterior lividity.
Okay, and if we turn then to the state's theory of the case at trial, their claim is that Hae Min Lee was killed at 2:36 p.m. and thereafter pretzeled up in the trunk of her Nissan Sentra for the next 4 to 5 hours. Would that be consistent with the finding of fixed frontal lividity in this case?
No, absolutely not. To get fixed full frontal lividity, that would mean that the body would have to be face down and left in that position in a temperate location for up to 8 to 12 hours in order for the lividity to fix. If the body was put into the trunk of a vehicle or pretzeled up and then transported and then even buried on its right side within a 4 to 5 hour window, the lividity pattern on the body once it was disinterred would be consistent with the burial position, meaning it would be on the right side of the body, and that is not the case here.
And then also, as you were sort of mentioning, according to the autopsy report, when Hae Min Lee's body was found in Lincoln Park, she was found buried on her right side. And the state's contention at trial was that she was buried in Lincoln Park in the 7 o'clock hour based upon cell phone pings about 4 to 5 hours after death. Would that be consistent with a finding of fixed frontal lividity?
No. If she was indeed buried within 4 to 5 hours of death, again, considering a temperate
580
location,
energy,
then
100
the
armor.
lividity pattern would have fixed after burial, and it would have been on the right half of her body and not fully frontal.
Okay, so let's next turn to the process known as rigor mortis. And could you please
580
describe
energy,
to our
that's a
audience
lot
the
there.
process known as rigor mortis?
Yeah, rigor
What
mortis
gives
is the
energy
stiffening of
is
the body's
this?
muscles that occurs after death.
Strength.
It's actually a chemical process that occurs to the body after death because the body is no longer able to make the ATP needed to break the actin-myosin complexes within muscle cells. I know that's a little too techy there for the audience, but it becomes evident about 2 to 4 hours after death, and it starts in the smaller muscle groups like the jaw, and then it will spread to the arms and the legs. It takes up to 8 to 12 hours to become fully developed.
Energy,
means that
speed,
the
all
body is completely
stats.
stiff.
Energy,
It will remain
speed,
fully
all
developed for about 8 to 12 hours, and then it will take an additional 8 to 12 hours
Energy,
to disappear or for the body to become flaccid again. And it will disappear in the same order of muscles as it appears. Now, if you happen to manipulate the body after rigor mortis is fully developed, meaning, say, you turn the head or you bend a limb, you break the rigor in that part of the body, and then that part of the body will go limp. And again, the time frame is just a guide. It is just as temperature dependent as lividity, and if it is really warm, the appearance and disappearance of the rigor mortis will be accelerated, and if it is significantly colder, then it will be delayed.
Okay, now in this case, Heyman Lee's body was found on February 9th, 1999. The state's claim that she was killed and buried on January 13th, 1999. And according to the state, when Lee's body was disinterred, her body still had some rigor, and that rigor was easily broken, probably due to temperature, according to the medical examiner. Now, if Lee had in fact been dead for almost a month before she was found, did these findings about rigor mortis make sense?
Well, the cold temperatures do complicate the estimate of time of death because it delays all of the changes that we see on the body and we use to make that estimate. And cold also does make the body stiff all by itself. I mean, the most extreme example of this would be freezing of the body if the temperature was cold enough. So in order to assess whether the stiffness is due to rigor mortis or the cold, we really need to consider the other changes we see on the body, namely those that are the evidence of decomposition. Decomposition is where the body starts to break down itself from the inside by the release of intracellular enzymes and the normal bacteria that is within your gut. And decomposition occurs after rigor mortis has passed. So we see skin slippage on the body, and skin slippage is something that happens in decomposition. So because we see evidence of decomposition, this means that the rigor mortis had to have already have been passed, and therefore the stiffening that we see in the body has to be due to the cold temperatures. Frankly, nothing else makes sense.
Okay, and that takes us then, you mentioned skin slippage a bit. So if we're turning to skin slippage, yeah, if you could go into a little bit more detail about exactly what skin slippage is in a dead body.
Skin slippage is the sloughing of the superficial layers of the skin off of the body, and it occurs early in decomposition. In temperate conditions, usually it starts around the 2 to 3 day mark. And its appearance really it can be varied. It usually starts as the formation of what looks like a blister. And then when the roof of the blister ruptures, the skin then sloughs off the body. It can result in loss of pigmentation in someone who is dark-skinned because that pigment is in those superficial layers of the skin. And it can make the body surface that is left very slimy to the touch. Skin slippage happens at any point where there's contact with the body, whether it be someone physically moving the body or something in the environment contacting the body. So in a case like this, you would expect the skin to slough or slip off of the body simply because it was buried in a shallow grave. So any parts of the environment that the body would have been exposed to, like rocks, would have caused skin slippage. Also, the skin would slip from being disinterred or dug up, from being transported to the morgue, and then once at the morgue, being undressed, photographed, and examined. So all of this would be anytime something contacted the body, it would cause the skin to slough or slip off.
Okay, and so if we look at the autopsy report in this case, it notes that Lee had quote-unquote generalized skin slippage. And so after you looked at the black and white photos from the autopsy, what are your conclusions about the amount of skin slippage in this case?
I think that the amount and the distribution of the skin slippage on the body is exactly what you would expect for a body that was buried in a shallow grave for about 3 to 4 weeks and then disinterred and examined.
Okay, and so if we combine these three findings about lividity, rigor mortis, and skin slippage, what's your best guess overall about how much time passed between the death of Hae-Min Lee and her burial?
Well, I think that there's two more things that we need to consider before estimating the time of death. One would be the burial of the body, and the other would be the examination of the brain. Burial itself delays all of the changes that occur after death that we've already talked about. There is a published rule of thumb that says that 1 week exposed to air is equal to about 8 weeks buried in dirt. And certainly my experiences here in Detroit have shown this to be actually pretty true. So that a body that's been buried for several weeks can resemble one that has been, say, dead in a house for only a few days. The other is the examination of the brain itself. In strangulation, the head gets congested and filled with blood because the pressure on the neck prevents the blood from draining from the head. So ordinarily, in strangulation victims who are starting to decompose, the head actually decomposes at a slightly faster rate than the rest of the body.
I do want this.
And thus, if that was the case, the brain would not appear normal and have a good demarcation between its gray and white matter structures as this one did. So, based on the fact that this is full fixed frontal lividity, that the rigor mortar had passed, that we're seeing general skin slippage in a body that was buried in cold temperatures and internally did not show evidence of decomposition, I think that this was a body that was left face down for up to 8 to 12 hours before it was buried, and that she was buried likely within 8 to 24 hours of her death.
Okay, and let's next turn to the topic of pulmonary edema. What exactly is a pulmonary edema?
Pulmonary edema is this frothy white or pink proteinaceous fluid that is within the lungs, and it does contain some red blood cells, thus giving it its pink color. But it is a non-specific autopsy finding. There are certainly certain types of deaths in which you are more apt to see pulmonary edema. Most notably, these would be opiate narcotic drug deaths or people dying of heart disease in which they're dying in heart failure. But it can be seen in any type of death, and that would include strangulation.
Okay, now in this case, there was a t-shirt with stains that was found by the driver's seat in Lee's Nissan Sentra. The state's claim at trial was that a strangulation caused Lee to have a pulmonary edema, and they claim that this can cause this foamy blood to come out of the victim's mouth and nose right after death. They also claim that whoever killed Lee likely then used that t-shirt to wipe away this foamy blood from Lee's nose and mouth after strangling her. Do you think that's a likely scenario in this case?
Well, unless pulmonary edema was produced as part of the mechanism of death, such as respiratory failure in opiate deaths, it usually doesn't just spontaneously froth up and emanate out of the nose and mouth. But when a body dies, it loses all of its muscle tone. So any fluid that is within the body, whether it be urine, pulmonary edema, or stomach contents, these can be expelled from the body if the body is placed in a dependent position. Meaning if someone was strangled and then after they died, they're tilted forward or perhaps placed prone on their stomach, certainly the fluid that would be within the lungs could then leak from the nose and mouth. It's also possible that during the initial struggle, before the pressure could be tightly maintained on her neck and she was still alive and conscious, that she was coughing or gagging during this process. And in that, she could have produced a mucousy blood-tinged fluid that could have escaped through her mouth.
Okay, now in this case, the state tested the t-shirt and they determined that the stains on the t-shirt tested positive for the presence of blood. They didn't do additional testing, though, and so were there additional tests the state could have done to determine whether in fact, these stains were the result of this frothy blood from a pulmonary edema?
Not that I'm aware of.
Let's turn next to the finding in the autopsy report about hemorrhages. And so according to the autopsy report, she had a focal right temporalis muscle hemorrhage, and she also had a focal right occipital subgaleal hemorrhage. And so what do those two things mean?
Well, the temporalis muscle hemorrhage is a bruise in the muscle that is located above your right ear that is visible after your scalp is reflected. So it's a muscle that's located between your scalp and your skull. And the right occipital subgale hemorrhage is a bruise that is actually on the undersurface of the scalp itself, on the right back of the head. As to what these mean, we have to think again about the lividity pattern in the head, because when blood pools in the scalp due to body position, it can sometimes mimic the subscalp hemorrhages. In this case, because this is full frontal anterior lividity, these bruises on the right side and the right back of her head mean that these are two blunt force impacts to her head that she sustained while she was alive.
Okay, and obviously you don't have the full evidence to be able to see the extent of these hemorrhages, but based upon the description